You can, Caroline's participating, so you have four. You're gonna have to take roll call vote. She will, somebody will have to.
Okay. Do you want me to do that, or is she doing it?
Hey, y'all, can you hear me?
We're here.
Awesome.
What else?
So our contingency plan, if something goes horribly wrong, is that the Zoom component will be turned off and Bill will continue leading the meeting in the room. So just a heads up in case anything goes wrong. But with no further ado, I'm happy to call the meeting to order. Hamilton Select Board meeting of June 17th at 7:04 p.m. Because I'm remote, we will take a roll call vote. So if y'all could just go through the room, starting with Tom.
Roll call.
Oh, Tom Myers here.
Rosie Kennedy here.
Bill Wilson here.
And Caroline Beaulieu here. All right. Let me get to the top of the agenda. Apologies. Couple of board and committee openings that I will go through. Just heads up, these keep proliferating. So folks who are looking for a way to get officially involved, we'd love for you to take a look at some of these openings. Conservation Commission has 2 openings. Council on Aging has 2 associate openings. The Finance and Advisory Committee has 1 associate opening. The Hamilton Development Corporation has 1 opening for a 3-year term. The Historic District Commission has 2 openings for 3-year terms and 2 openings for 2-year terms. And a reminder that 1 must be a resident of the Historic District and 1 must be a resident realtor. And the Human Rights Commission has 1 at-large opening. Next, we will move on to public comment. Just a reminder for folks who have public comment, it's 3 minutes on a topic not on the agenda. If your topic is already on the agenda, we ask that you please hold your comments until such time as the agenda item comes up. Otherwise, if folks have public comment, now is the time.
Jack Davis, 57 Lois Street. Just actually a quick question about town policy concerning the use of Patton Park by a private group. And in particular, I'm wondering, as a member of a local church here, whether there's any bylaw that prohibits, say, having an Easter sunrise service at Patton Park.
We've lost audio online. I don't know if I can see that Jack is talking, but we can't hear him online.
Sorry. Bill, can you
Should
fix
I
that?
restate the question, or just a question about whether there's any town bylaw that would prohibit a local church, such as First Congregational Church of Hamilton, of having a sunrise service at Patton Park. We're looking at April of 2025, and this is not to be sponsored by the town, but whether it's permitted under existing bylaws.
Yeah, I think we've gotten a couple of questions and comments this week relative to use of public facilities, and it will be a topic that we'll bring up. I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that many of the questions have come around the Patton Homestead specifically, I think after the picnic. And that has a very different set of rules because obviously that space is booked out to private groups for private events, including weddings and birthdays and celebrations of that kind. And so that's a sort of different set of rules. So we can certainly take a look at what the current town documented rules and bylaws are for something like that. But again, it would probably be different looking at Patton Homestead versus Patton Park, just because the nature of the Patton Homestead is that it does get used for private events for private groups that pay a fee to be there and use it, just like the Hamilton One and Pride Picnic did.
Right. Yeah, this would be a private event, no food or alcohol served, no tickets, whatnot. But thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
I didn't know if I needed the green light. My name is Willa Scudder, 25 Park Street, Hamilton. And if I may, I'd like to pass out an article that was sent via email to all
Public
select
comment
board
is just for
members.
public comment. Typically, we don't take presentations during public comment.
Okay, it was emailed. So I strongly oppose the appointment of Natalie Hildreth to any town board seat based on recent behavior at town meetings. At a meeting last week, she overtook the microphone and made clear that she had been stalking some members of the room to intimidate myself, who she used by name, and another townsperson from Wenham, calling us by name, name-calling other members in the room, threatening other women and their property and horses. Neither one of us have either seen or met this woman. She refused to share her name. I had to approach her after the meeting and ask what her name was. She reluctantly gave it. I later learned that she also has appointed herself town moderator on community Facebook pages that control over, or not control, but over 4,000 members of the community. Her behavior has caused other townspeople enough fear that they have hired a lawyer and filed a cease and desist, of which has been shared with each of you. A no trespassing order with both the Hamilton and Wenham Police. And I would like to ask this board, if this behavior is not tolerated by citizens of the community, then why would this committee commit to electing a member to allow this behavior to be tolerated by a committee member? Thank you.
Thanks. And just a heads up, Willa, we did get word today that she's withdrawn her application for the committee to which she had applied. So that part of it has been taken off the agenda, I believe.
I appreciate that update, Caroline. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good evening, Ellen Wright for Asbury Ave. I would like to just reiterate what Ms. Scudder had mentioned that evening last week. It was shocking. I saw Ms. Flynn in the parking lot. She looked very distraught going out to her car. I do believe she needed an escort. I don't believe that Natalie Hildreth, I don't know her, but again, being at the meeting, witnessing what had gone down, more or less the aftermath in the parking lot, I don't think that someone who would exhibit this sort of stalking, threatening-like behavior should be permitted to serve on any town committee. Hopefully this was an isolated incident, and hopefully Ms. Hildreth will follow the cease and desist order and won't cause any further trouble for any townspeople. The second issue I would just like to bring to the board's attention is the drag queen situation at the Pride picnic over the weekend. I don't think anyone would personally begrudge a Pride picnic, but I don't think having a drag queen at a family-friendly event or an event that purports to be family-friendly is appropriate in any way. I went online, did some research. This particular drag queen, Mr. Hart, has very vulgar, pornographic, shocking posts. He mentions himself as a fuckboy. Excuse the cussing, but before we have drag queens at public events, we should do our homework. The fuckboy of your adult nightmares, big gay bad crawl. There's lewd pictures of this drag queen gyrating his pelvis where he's sticking out his genitals where someone appears to be giving him a blowjob. We have emojis of eggplants. I think we all know what that's about. Highly inappropriate, not something that our town, with respectable, dignified people, should be propagating and advancing. Sponsoring? Huh. Well, enough said. Did money change hands on this, or did we just lend them the park? Oh, we paid for
No,
this?
they paid, and we didn't sponsor it.
They,
They listed us as a sponsor. We didn't ask to be listed as a sponsor. They listed as a sponsor only because, as with most nonprofits that rent the Patton Homestead, they were given a 10% discount, the way all nonprofits do. And that was the only reason they were.
Library, there's the community council, there's the town of Hamilton, town of Wenham.
Yeah.
The multicultural council spent $1,000.
We're discussing blowjobs?
For this, so I just, there is sponsorship.
Oh, so-
Go to their
I-
page, you can see the sponsors,
Sorry, I was out of line. I shouldn't have answered. I apologize.
but I'm just saying.
This is on the agenda, because so I do want to talk about it in depth later.
Well, all right,
at
just
the
to be
time.
clear, the town was a sponsor, okay? So maybe someone here should send out a Freedom of Information Act request and get the accounting for this money that may have changed hands, right? All right, well, for your own edification, there's a copy for each of you. This was not emailed.
This is somebody who's about as polite as Nancy.
Disgusting. Gross. Children should be ashamed of themselves. Amicus brief. My understanding is that the planning board has
This is a topic
advanced.
on the agenda, so you'll need to
That's,
hold
it's
your
a topic on the
comments
agenda.
until we
Public
talk
comments
about
for
it
things that are not on the agenda.
We'll hold off. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Mimo. I live at 21 Asbury Ave in Hamilton. And I have to go pick up someone at the airport, so if this, I don't know if you can talk about this or not, but it's come up. A couple years ago, I made a comment on a Facebook post that, does everyone see what's going on in this town with the LGBTQ LMNOP flags in the elementary schools? The books, are they in our schools? And I think, you know, we have some values, family values. I got bullied so bad by, I think it was 4 women. Bullied me, took my post down after they berated me, and then they banned me from Buy Nothing for a month. So it was, you know, it's ridiculous. We do tolerate, and the progressive people are pushing, saying, be tolerant, and we are tolerant, and we've tolerated, but I think to understand tolerance, you have to understand the line of intolerance, and that is where children are concerned. And where are the parents? I guess they think it's love is love and all, but there is pornography in our schools and in our library. There are gay men dressing as women. What does that have to do with, you know, any kind of family happy values? It's sad. And these are my opinions, my feelings, and I believe a lot of people feel this way, but have been also bullied. Can we come together and find that line of tolerance again, where we're protecting children and we're protecting all the minorities? Thank you for hearing me.
Were there any further public comments in the room or online? No? All right, next we just have select board member and town manager reports. I'm happy to go around the room. Tom, do you have anything to report to the group?
Nothing tonight. Thanks, Caroline.
Okay. Rosie?
I do. I unfortunately forgot my little notebook, but I was very conscientious about taking notes in, so I'm going to have to just tell you a few things from memory. I attended a ZBA meeting the beginning of the month. We're in the 133 Essex Street Safe Harbor claim by the ZBA has been appealed to the state, and we, as of the date of that meeting, there has been nothing heard back from them, so I don't have anything further except that it's still on the agenda for the July meeting. And the second thing is that there was an alternate position, and 2 people showed up in anticipation of applying for that position, and one was a very busy dad, so he respectfully ceded the alternate position to Michael Madden, who is here tonight, and ZBA recommended him unanimously, so we'll have a vote on that coming up. Secondly, I attended the Environmental Impact Committee meeting. Whoa, they have so much energy, that group. Because I don't have all my notes, I cannot remember everything off the top of my head. But one of the most interesting things is that Bob Knowles came on and gave a presentation about applying for a grant for electric vehicles, or one electric vehicle for the schools. I don't know all the details about it. There was a very complex grant and complex method of applying for it, but I thought that was an interesting concept, and we'll provide more information next time. So, and I'm happy to say my board, my other love, the COA, 3 members who are up for reappointment have all decided they want another 3-year term, and bravo, and we'll hopefully be able to endorse them tonight as well. That's all, Caroline.
Bill, anything from you?
Yeah, I guess just quickly on the schools, most people are probably already aware that there was a poll survey that went out, that all came back, that was reviewed at the last school committee meeting. After that, they did vote, even though the poll and survey came back the opposite decision. They looked at that as informal only, and the school committee still felt, that the consolidation of the schools and building a new school on the Cutler property was something they wanted to move forward with, so that was voted on and approved. They also voted to reconfigure the grade structure, with Bucher being the kindergarten school, and then 1 through 5, I guess, at the Cutler Consolidated School. So that was voted. That does move now to what's called schematic plans, where you'll start to see visuals of what that building will look like. They'll fine-tune the cost of doing the project. They also said there'd be a lot of discussion through the process of how all the buildings are in need of repair. So I encourage everyone to stay close to the process and voice your thoughts, but that's where the school board is at this point. I think their next vote wouldn't be, they'll work on the schematic design, but probably January or February is when they would vote to put it on the warrant article for an April vote to get funding, from the town. So that would happen next April.
I'll add to that. I met with John McGrath late last week, and I think one of the key drivers for the decision for the Cutler consolidation was tax impact to residents, and I know that conversation has been a bit obfuscated, so we're going to work to schedule some sort of meeting later in the summer that's just a money talk to discuss. I mean, there's been a lot of models distributed around, the turf field tax impact, the school tax impact, all of the things that we're sort of looking at on the horizon and what those relative tax impacts are, including some models around if we just renovated, things like that. So I think that'll be a good opportunity for folks if they just want to have the conversation through the lens of tax impact and money. John said he would be happy to schedule something like that, so we'll look to do that as well. I think 2 other things. We did have a good, if passionate, meeting last Wednesday night, an information session here in Hamilton. We mostly talked about the school building and the MBTA 3A zoning stuff. We had said that we might touch on a couple of other topics, but those ended up being sort of big and juicy, and I think we had a lot of good conversation there. There are some follow-on items. There's things on the agenda tonight, specifically the amicus brief request for 3A, and then, as Bill mentioned, ongoing milestones for the school. Lastly, on the Gordon Conwell, just a quick update. We've continued to have conversations. We've received notes from some of the abutters. We've met with the developer, and they would love to engage with some of the abutters. So if you are an abutter or you've reached out to us, we may reach back out to ask if you're comfortable being connected with the developer, because they'd like to have direct conversations with abutters as opposed to going through the town itself. We continue to remain optimistic about what they're trying to do and the benefits to the town, and work both with Gordon Conwell and with the developer to try to sort of move this project forward in the most thoughtful and low-impact way that we can. So more on that as it unfolds, but I think right now we're still waiting. They're in their due diligence period, and we're working with our attorneys to work on those draft agreements and MOUs. So that's sort of the update on those two things. Joe, anything?
Yeah, I just want to add, because Rosie referenced it, late Friday, we got communication from the state, from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, that the safe harbor invocation has been upheld by the state. Then we were waiting to hear from Attorney Amy Questle with KP Law today, so she kind of got back to us late this afternoon with what the next steps would be for the ZBA chair and the planning director. The applicant still has the opportunity to appeal HLC's ruling to the Housing Appeals Committee. We don't know yet whether they're going to do that or not. So there's more to come on that, but at this moment, the town's invocation of safe harbor has been upheld, so.
All right, any additional, do we have comments?
We have a couple people at the podium, sure.
I just, I mentioned it at Wednesday's meeting. I just thought I could do it again in this forum to request if the encouragement of the school committee to come up with an alternate choice for the voters for next April, so that they voted for the consolidation for a certain amount of money and being reimbursed by the state. If we could encourage the school committee, if they really care about the kids, so it's not an all or nothing, bring up to code of Cutler option that would be secondary. So if the consolidation doesn't pass, which I think has a good probability, we wouldn't have to wait 10 years to actually do something for the children. And I understand that the state can't support two projects, but if we could encourage a exploration of an option without state.
We have those numbers, and they're in those presentations, and I think certainly we can have further conversations with the school committee, but I think the thought was, if that fails, we know roughly from the math from the state what it would cost to renovate those buildings. So it would just then be a matter of, instead of doing something and getting reimbursement, we would go to the town at the next town meeting and ask for, $40 million or whatever we decide to do to start renovating the schools one by one.
So that would be the plan. It wouldn't be that we'd have to wait 12 years to, I mean, that's the way it was presented at the Wednesday meeting.
We don't get reimbursement, right?
Right.
So if you're not getting reimbursement, it's just a matter of the school district saying, we need $40 million for this school, and the town bonds it and votes for it.
Right.
There's nothing that goes through the state because it's not a grant process or program. We're just choosing to pay out of pocket for that.
Okay, it telegraphs to the community that you're sort of putting all your eggs in one basket, and I think that it would make sense to have another strategy more vetted. I know people that are in the industry that think those estimates for the renovation were really out of whack, which makes sense because doing new is always more money and easier to quote, but I think it would be a great way to make sure that we're actually supporting our kids, which we all do, so it doesn't become a false choice. So any support that we can have, that'd be great.
I would encourage you to look at those numbers in that deck. The renovation is infinitely more expensive than the new construction.
I have builders that say engineers that say the exact opposite. So I just think that it just needs, I don't need to argue it, because neither of us are in that area, but I do know, I have talked to engineers in the industry who say that's false. And they've actually stood in these meetings and have said that, like when the consultants came and spoke in December, he said that's just not true. And he does this for a living. So I think that it could be more vetted out and be a more realistic estimate. And then we could actually really prove that we are doing something for our kids. If it doesn't pass, but this one does, then we can execute that one instead of waiting, because we do care about our kids. We want them to be in safe schools. But it doesn't bode well to put all of our eggs in one basket, knowing that there's a high probability of it not passing. Thank you.
No, I think that's, Caroline, I do think that's a smart parallel path. I wasn't at the meeting. Hopefully Eric and others heard that, Deb, if you mentioned it then. But I do think, Caroline, if we are talking to the FinCom, we should, and we have those numbers, even using those, we should outline the capital costs and the tax impact separately versus, what John offered to do for the consolidated school.
Yep, and again, whether we agree with the inputs, I think is a separate conversation, but those numbers are all in those decks that were presented, and I think John was just gonna sort of walk through them and sort of show what those tax impacts are. I mean, I agree with Deb, if we wanted to do those things in parallel, you know, we can talk about that, but I think it's
Yeah.
also just a bandwidth of the group of people that are focused on one, you know, haven't been doing the other. But happy to walk through those numbers with John at a later time.
And as the school liaison for the select board, I will certainly have the discussion.
And I would,
Question, when you do that, I assume that you can get state money for one of the schools, and I guess maybe when you're doing those numbers, I didn't see that in that.
I can't hear, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question is, if you're doing renovations, could you apply to and get funding from the state? Or is it just on new school builds? I don't know the answer.
It was only reno ad, I believe. So if you renovate
Right.
an ad, you can file for money. If you completely build new, you can apply. But if it's just renovations, those costs are not covered by reimbursement.
well, there's a major repairs program,
Yeah,
which the schools have applied to for the high school roof for some reimbursements. So they won't do upgrades, but major repairs to, say, the heating system and so forth. Yes, there is that possibility. I don't know where we would be on the list, but it certainly is important, given the tax impact of consolidated school. It's important to think about that, and certainly this is a very vocal group, and it's important to make sure that this information gets disseminated to people in your groups to attend school committee meetings and discuss this with them as well.
I hadn't heard that we had those rental numbers outside the MSBA. Are those publicly available, that we can show the numbers and how we came to those numbers to other building experts? Do we have those available?
I mean, John McGrath and the school building committee have those. They were in the sort of the presentation where they showed the final 3 options. There were multiple tables in there around the costs that are publicly available. I don't know where they're keeping all that information, but I'm happy to reach out to John separately as well.
So it should be in the March 18th meeting minutes.
Thank you. And I also
Those
heard.
were also, I'm sorry to interrupt, those were also just estimates. Those weren't actual numbers. So keep that in mind as well.
It would just be good to have somebody else look at them as well, because like we alluded earlier, there was building engineers that thought those numbers were exorbitant. So having a second set of eyes doesn't hurt, right? Take a look at them,
Right.
how we came to them.
Yeah, and again, those are just architects' estimates, is what I was told at one of the meetings with the OPM owner's project manager, and that there are not specific numbers yet until they get into it, so.
Okay. I also heard Caroline allude that, she understood one of the reasons they picked that choice 3.4 was, I think it came down to a cost per child, tax
Yep.
revenue and whatnot. And I heard you were implying you're going to have an info session with John, maybe to explain that a little more. But I think one thing we've learned through, especially the turf fields, is if the town wants something, they'll pay for it, especially if it's for the children. So they're saying to you, or the school board, quite clearly, they don't want that 3.4. So we're spending 10 months on these schematics for something they've pretty much know they're not going to get passed in town vote. So that was, why we were imploring last week. Please go with the other option. Even one of the members on the school board was imploring with the school board, please go for a different option that has a more viable chance to pass and vote. Again, one thing you learn through this town is that they're willing to pay for something if it's good for the children and it's good for the town. And I think that something not 3.4 would have a better chance, even if it's outside the MSBA.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think they all, and you're right about a lot of, but I'll just say the school also positioned it as they can help more students, with the one consolidated school and hit all the students in elementary grades versus waiting 10 years to do 3 private elementaries and having kids
Right.
continue in poor
They also
conditions.
deny all the studies that say smaller schools are better for children, for this grade children.
So, and I think through this parallel path, I think they're gonna, like they cited Hopkinton to me as with much more kids in the school, and it's ranked 10th in the state. And so I'm asking these questions, but I encourage everyone, I appreciate you coming here to tell us as well, but, those Thursday nights are important too, and, we'll stay on it.
Thank you for your comments, Bill. I would also like to bring it to the attention of this committee and the school committee, and I will bring this up. Yes, you're looking forward, what about all the children that have gone through those buildings and did not experience a brand-new state-of-the-art school? 2 out of 3 of my children will be those children. We want to do the right thing for the community. We want to support, as Jeff mentioned, financially, the options that make sense for the most amount of children. Many of us have grown children or children that will not benefit. I think the argument about the right now is not fiscally responsible if we look at neighboring towns and the way that they've done it. Thank you.
Hello again, Ellen Wright for Asbury Ave. While we're on the topic of fiscal responsibility, school consolidation, developers, consultants, hundreds of thousands of dollars, consultants for this, consultants for that. I came in late to the Challenges and Opportunities Forum last week, but I heard from a couple of people the Zoom meeting got hacked by some sort of crazed porno guy, and it was just sort of hell on wheels. So tell me, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for consultants to research projects that really aren't going to be passed at town meeting, if we're being honest. But you can't scrape together a measly sum to put a cyber tech expert on retainer to make sure the town's computer services intranet is secure? Fiscal responsibility. Like, let's talk about the fundamentals here. Hello, McFly.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, because
Right, so the issue with the Zoom bombing last week, there's been no invasion of our town server systems. We actually have a very good cybersecurity system. In fact, above and beyond what our insurer wants us to have, we're part of a North Shore consortium where we get cyber security measures as part of that group. Zoom has some tools that are available to help keep that type of thing from happening, but they require you to lock the meeting. Because it's a public meeting, I can't lock the meeting. People get in, they have the password, they get in, and then they can do crazy things. We're working on it, the police are investigating it, they're working with Zoom to try to identify the person. We have hundreds of meetings over Zoom since 2020. It's happened twice. It stinks. It's awful. It was gross. We turned it off right away. I feel badly for it. We use Zoom as a convenience for our residents so that if you can't get here and you want to participate, you can. We'll start making a comment that if something like that happens in the future, get off the Zoom meeting and pick it up on HWCam or come on down. Our meetings are in person almost all the time. And unless there's a reason to have a Zoom-only meeting, we generally have in-person meetings with a Zoom component to provide a convenience service to the residents. But there's nothing in the Zoom that allows me, without locking the meeting, to keep somebody from coming in that has the code and then misbehaving. I can remove them from the meeting, but at that moment in time, in that meeting, we felt it was better to just close the meeting because the time it would take to remove the person and would they try to sneak back in. It was just I'm sorry, it was disappointment, but.
Yeah, and just to reiterate Joe's point, as someone in cybersecurity for my day job, it had nothing to do with our network or infrastructure. That was from Zoom, so.
I would also just remind us, like, we're gonna go into a couple of,
It was the Zoom was made public to everyone to access, and so there's security concerns with Zoom when you have a public-facing webinar that people that know what they're doing with cybersecurity can hack into that and then gain control of the screen. It has nothing to do with our network and infrastructure. It's Zoom security features when you have a public-facing meeting. People can get that public link, and then if they have the skills, they can break into it.
When we advertise a meeting, we advertise the link, so make it easy for everybody to get to. So anybody who's searching for a meeting to try to get into, it's unfortunate.
Maybe I'll just ask you, I've not been to one of these meetings before, so I don't know what the protocol is. Louis Soma, 351 Bay Road. Do topics get discussed in order, or should I wanted to talk about this amicus brief on this 3A thing.
Items on the agenda get talked in order unless somebody on the board moves to take it out of order.
Going like that.
Yeah, it did. It kind of got out of path, but.
Are we still in public comment?
Yeah, no.
yeah,
I just wanted to talk on the school really quick, because we were talking about that.
Yeah, and then let's just kind of make a point to get back to.
Yes,
agenda.
270 Asbury Street. I'm talking on behalf of myself as an individual citizen. I just want to be clear on that. My concern about the school is, we have the school consolidation, and I know some people have brought it up, but if 3A happens in town and there's unlimited occupants and unlimited bedrooms, how many children will that be, and will we need another $150 million school? So I'm bringing that up because if every unit had one child, that's a $15 million increase to our town budget of like 35 million. So I think there's a lot of things swirling around together, and I think it's important that we keep that in mind as well. So I feel like they go together with the school consolidation. So thank you.
All town services, yep, I agree.
So we will move on. I do just want to say, like, knowing that there's a lot of items on the agenda tonight that folks have deep feelings about, and given how we started the meeting, like, I just ask that, you know, being antagonistic to the board or to each other is not helpful. And, you know, we're all here together to try to figure this out. So as we move through these items, if we have, you know, thoughts we want to share, I welcome folks to engage in the conversation, but let's all sort of be respectful. When we start getting antagonistic, I think people shut down. Nobody feels good. You know, people feel bullied and harassed. So let's just try to keep it, you know, kind as best that we can. So moving to the consent agenda, I will certainly entertain a motion to approve the revised minutes of June 3rd, 2024.
So moved.
I'll just make one note. Lori emailed me today. There was a couple of misspellings, just a couple of names that were misspelled. So if we could just amend that to approve the minutes as amended, then I'll send those around as Lori amended. There's just 3 spelling typos.
Okay, so moved with amendments as mentioned by Tom Myers.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Nope.
Second, Tom.
Awesome. Oh, sorry, Tom. All right, we'll take a roll call vote, starting with Tom.
Tom Myers, yes.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Bill Wilson, yes.
Caroline Beaulieu, yes. All right. Look at us, just running a mere 25 minutes behind. All right, the first topic on the agenda is approve the application for permanent outdoor seating for 15 Walnut, discuss and vote. I believe we already approved their temporary outdoor seating, and now there's been a change and they can apply more permanently, and that's why this is back to us. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, and just so you know, if you have questions, Monica Howenstein from 15 Walnut and Serenity Group is here to answer your questions. But yes, this is essentially, the state passed a law that makes the outdoor seating that was allowed during the COVID to be permanent through the local licensing authority. In Hamilton, that's the select board. It doesn't need to go through the state or any other hoops. The permanent seating is seasonal, and essentially what happens is the number of seats that 15 Walnut puts outside on their patio get removed from the inside, so there's no increase in capacity, and they make sure that they do it in a way that keeps the public way clear so that people can walk back and forth. It's been approved every year during COVID, and it's now been approved again by your department heads. They've all signed off on it. They have no questions. It's going to operate the way it's been operating the last several years, if you approve it.
And in your packet, you can see there's been a lot of additional conversation between Russ and the building inspector and everybody else, so it feels, including the fire chief, so that's all in the packet for review if folks have additional questions or concerns.
So it still would be seasonal though, and the building inspector would advise why? Is there any structure being built above or around it, or?
It's just part of the approval process for liquor licenses. And
So, but there's not an intent to put
there's no permanent structure
anything
being,
over
no.
it?
He just-
Okay, I didn't
But
wanna
he was,
say-
he was required to sign off on it when it was temporary too, so.
Got it. I have no further questions.
So I'll make a motion that we approve the permanent seating at 15 Walnut as outlined in our packet.
Second.
Second by Tom. All right, any further discussion?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions, and I think they've already been answered, but just to confirm, the number of outdoor seats will remain the same as it was during COVID, is that correct? Yep.
Monica?
It's actually less seats.
Hi. Do you want to come up and chat with us if we have any questions? Okay, so fewer seats?
Our occupancy is for 99, and so we're putting, I think it's four tops and one or two tops outside, so it's less than we've done in years past. But it's just something that we do like to offer for
Yeah,
guests.
I think that's a nice idea, and I was on the board previously when we approved this. I think it was 36 seats that we approved.
It was initially, yeah, but that means we have to remove those seats from inside the restaurant, so just keeping a small patio so that we don't have to remove as many seats from inside.
Okay, so you're planning less? Okay, that's fine. And then, you've had no issues from the police with noise or untoward behaviors at all? Okay.
The
I didn't
patio
think-
shuts down pretty early.
Yeah, I know. Okay, great. I just wanted to ask that. That's great, thank you.
Anything else?
Did you bring samples?
The nachos.
Awesome. All right, if no further discussion, we can take a vote, starting with Tom.
Tom Myers, yes.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Bill Wilson, yes.
Caroline Beaulieu, yes. The ayes have it.
Thanks, Monica.
All right, the next is appointment of boards and committee members to fill expiring terms and vacancies, discussion and vote. If you go into your packet, I believe it's page 22 of the packet, is that right?
Yeah. In addition to the list of reappointments that were on there, there are 2 applications for filling vacancies. Michael Madden to the ZBA as an alternate, and Chris Woolston to the FinCom as an alternate. Is that correct? No, to take a seat in the. The board could choose to take all of these in one vote, if you like. It's up to you.
Yeah, just the amendment that we did receive word from Natalie Hildreth that she would like to withdraw her name. So she is in the packet, but she will no longer be seeking appointment to the Cultural Council.
Sure, I'll make a motion that we approve these reappointments and appointments in one vote.
As amended, right, with a
As amended, that's correct, sorry.
second?
All right, are there comments, and if so, do we want to go appointment by appointment, or are there just any in particular that we wanted to discuss?
You've typically not done a lot of changes to the reappointment list. You're changing it a little bit where you have 2 new members, but they're both here if you want to reference them, but they were supported, their applications were supported by the board chairs with letters that are in your packets, so they've been vetted by their boards.
I'll just make a comment, Caroline, if I may, that this was something I didn't know, but at the ZBA, I was a past member of the Town Hall Building Committee, and prior to my appointment to that committee, I discovered at the ZBA appointment discussion from Michael Madden that he had previously been on the Town Hall Building Committee, and as a person who spent a lot of hours working for that committee, people who put time into that are admirable, so I appreciate that, and so I would certainly endorse somebody who's willing to work hard for the town.
Absolutely, and I think all of us have worked with these folks in some capacity or another over the last few years, and I mean, I think everyone on here, I could say, with the exception of a handful that I just don't know, have done a really incredible job, so I have no comments. Any other further discussion?
I'm good.
All right, we'll take a roll call vote, but we'll start with Bill this time to keep things interesting.
Bill Wilson, yes.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Tom Myers, yes.
Caroline Beaulieu, yes. The yeses have it. It's unanimous. All right, next.
Congratulations, everybody, on your appointments and reappointments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
I just was wondering if anybody came prepared with a speech that we didn't allow them to
Yeah,
give.
if somebody wants to
I hate-
speak, they're welcome to.
Yeah, I hate that we didn't give folks that opportunity. Okay, the next is the review of draft agreements related to Gordon Conwell student housing and discuss with Attorney Jonathan Witten. We have John, or did have John.
He's here.
Oh, I see John.
He's here.
Is on the Zoom with us to review the documents that he has provided to us. John, do you want to kick us off with anything?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. So the drafts that I prepared are from 1,000 Miles High. They're broad and really open the door for the conversation from the select board as to what other requirements or conditions to a development agreement would be appropriate for what we know is the proposed project from the developer's perspective, and what would be the remaining potential development on the Gordon Conwell campus. So the development agreements would be contracts, or are contracts, that would bind, in the first case, the developer, in the second case, the seminary, would bind their future project and or future projects when it relates to the seminary. So the way it's drafted, these would be voluntary considerations made by the developer or the seminary. And they would, as drafted, would run with the land and would be tethered to a subsequent purchaser. So if the seminary were to sell the remaining portion of the campus, the development agreement would apply to that future use. And similarly, from the developer's development agreement, if the developer were to try and flip the entire project, the conditions of the development agreement would run with the land there. So they're written broadly, connected to the property in the respective cases, and again, really require the select board to discuss both the numerics, I deliberately left out the numbers, but also issues of impact from particularly the proposed development and concerns for kind of preparing for potential new development on the seminary side. So it's an opportunity to kind of look at the prospect of the 102 acres in a big picture and impose restrictions, constraints that are voluntarily offered by both parties now, so that you're preparing and planning for the future. That's the approach.
And this is specifically, I just want to be sure I understand, this is specifically the agreement between us and the developer, not us and Gordon Conwell, right?
There's two. So there's one as between the town and the prospective developer.
I see it, okay.
And then there's one with the seminary.
Okay, so there was a monetary contribution in both of them, I see.
Yes, and I was very careful to not put numbers in. These are political decisions, not legal, so I've kind of framed it for the select board's discussion.
Okay.
The one with the Gordon Conwell does actually have a number in it because it was offered by Gordon Conwell and previously discussed in executive session. So I left that there just for your edification. That's the figure that the seminary has offered to this point, so.
Yep. And I think, yeah, so just context for folks listening. There are things that Gordon Conwell has sort of entered into talks with us to do sort of in good faith as we sort of go through this process. And then there's the conversation that we're having directly with the developer. And those are sort of split. There are some things that one impacts the other. So for example, the 25% affordable at 80% AMI, we've requested 25%, but that could end up sort of sliding one way or the other because the percentage of AMI or percentage of affordable could affect the sale price. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Everybody knows the 25%. We haven't gotten a ton of pushback to date. We feel pretty good about it. But again, even though we're negotiating with the developer itself, it does impact Gordon. And so it sort of all goes round and round.
Madam Chair, the one kind of outlier that we haven't discussed in the past, Joe and I have discussed it briefly, but it's now before the select board, is in the draft with the seminary, I included, it's paragraph B as in boy, a paragraph, at least in outline form, to think about a possible right of first refusal with the seminary for the future. So a right of first refusal would require the landowner to provide the town with a right to refuse an offer first. It's a wonderful thing for the town to have. The town is the beneficiary of rights of first refusals on 61A and 61B property. So it would be that similar approach here. And I think from the seminary's perspective, there's no harm in it at all. There's no exposure. But from the town's perspective, it really allows you to be there first as opposed to the private sector.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, certainly the board can discuss this further. I think, we went into this hoping, I think the cash payment from Gordon is certainly part of it, but when it comes to the developer, most of where we've centered our efforts have been on trying to secure the highest amount of affordable that we can, as well as assurances that the use of the building will remain largely the same use that it is now, which is, apartment rental housing without expansion, any current planned expansion to the space. But if there are folks here who've come to comment about additional requirements or things that they wanted to see, certainly we can talk about that. But most of our efforts have really been there, so that what we're saying is this 11 acres that's being, sold to this developer, it's currently it's apartments, for lack of a better word, and we're literally saying no change to the footprint of the building. The renovations are all interior renovations. It will continue to be used. The only thing now is that it actually goes on to, online to the market. So we will receive some tax revenue. Again, this is not a huge victory in terms of we're getting huge amounts of tax revenue, but we currently get zero. And so for the rental, we get tax revenue. But I know we received, emails and comments and Facebook comments from folks who have other expectations of the agreement and things that we put in there. But I just want to be clear that we are sort of focused on those two things right now.
And Madam Chair, so this is the draft agreement with the apartment developer. So paragraphs C and D as drafted would have a cap on the number of dwelling units, and then D, as a suggestion, would be a cap on the number of bedrooms. The number of bedrooms are probably capped by the physical layout of the structures already, but something for the board to certainly consider. I'd also want to add to the select board that these drafts do not presume any permitting hurdles that either the developer or the seminary need to go through, and they need to go through them. There's no question about that. There's a detailed process that has to take place to determine whether or not the reuse of the dormitories would be permissible. These development agreements drafts just presume that either the developer or the seminary will work those issues out.
Yeah, there's no promise from the town to make an allowance. They have to follow the permitting rules, period.
Do we know how many current bedrooms there are across all units?
I don't offhand, but I can find that out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
mean, I
we were gonna
certainly
also
think we
try to
should
get,
not-
not only that, right? Last meeting, we wanted to get how many are occupied now, because we had some concern that it was also said that some people would just stay in those units, so those likely wouldn't go towards that 25%. I mean, for me, the 25% is the most important thing in this document. But I want to know how many bedrooms and who's living there now and how many would stay in those 209 units.
Yep. I mean, and curiously, like my understanding is that even if folks come back or decide to go back in, like during the renovations, I don't know if there would be sort of a displacement period or how that works, but everybody would have to be newly contracted through the property manager of the developer. So they would, at that point, I think anything, and John, keep me honest, like if we've said it has to be 25%, and I think we talked about local preference and like the lottery and sort of, tying all of that in, even if they decided that 50% of those are going to be occupied by existing residents, that wouldn't count towards that unless they went through that process to the 25% affordable. They could stay in those units if that's the agreement that was made, but they wouldn't like be grandfathered into the affordable housing. They would have to apply just like everybody else, and 25% of them would still, in addition to that, be affordable units.
Yeah, that's correct. That's a nice way of saying it. The devil's in the details in terms of how many units the developer actually proposes, but that's absolutely right. If the agreement is 25% to be rented below market, then those 25% have to be rented below market. That's a contractual obligation the developer would have. I should also say that in terms of the local preference issue, it's a very sensitive issue nationwide. In Massachusetts, local preference is still permissible. It's frowned upon. It's very difficult to get the Commonwealth to approve local preference programs. but I put it in here anyways, because in a lot of jurisdictions, that's really, really important. So let's keep it in. It may not be plausible at the end of the day, but it's certainly contractually permissible. Whether or not the town can get the state to join in is a different story. But that is in this draft.
Do you think that local preference, I know that we think that it's a very outside chance that we could get 100% on our SHI. Do you think putting a local preference in here hurts our chances in any way going forward?
No, I mean, there's politics here. That's clear, but no, I don't believe so. That would be really impermissible for the Commonwealth to disregard Hamilton because we're trying to negotiate a local preference. So it's really apples and oranges. It's a fair question, but no, I don't think that in and of itself is a problem.
Okay, so I have some questions, John.
Yes, good evening.
Hi, it's nice to see you again. So my first question is, when we talk about the agreement with the seminary, you're saying that this is also an MOU? This is not part of an actual binding development agreement, is that correct?
No, or the
Well, I think it's semantics. So an MOU, in my opinion, is a contract. A development agreement is a contract. An agreement per se is a contract. So no, I drafted this with the intent of it being a contract between the town and the seminary if the two parties can reach terms. So no, the intent of the frame here, the framework, is for it to be contractual.
On the seminary's portion of this?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this is not an MOU with the seminary, it would be some version of a development agreement, right?
That's correct.
But the
Again, how it's labeled is not relevant, in my opinion. It's whether or not it creates a contractual promise. And the way
Exactly.
I've envisioned these documents would be, there'd be contractual promises.
Right, okay, so then it would be more than an MOU. Okay, all right, so my next comment is, and obviously the agreement with the developer, at this phase, you're introducing the concept of a voluntary MOU. So I just want to make clear that we are talking about a non-legally binding document with the developer. If it is in the form of an MOU, it certainly outlines intentions and expectations, but it does not bind the developer legally. Is that correct?
No, respectfully, I would argue that the agreement with the draft with the developer would also be contractually binding. The only part of this draft that would look like it's a gift as opposed to a contract would be the monetary donation. Okay. And the reason for that is the town doesn't have leverage with the seminary to extract money. The money extraction from the seminary or the developer will have to be made voluntarily. It has to be offered by the developer or the seminary because there's no permit, at least the way we're drafting this now, there's no permits, there's no quid pro quos here. The town is not providing anything beyond what it would provide any developer or any institution in the town of Hamilton. So I would say both are drafted with the intent of them being binding contracts.
Okay, so then they would be more than MOUs, they would be legally binding. Okay, and
Yes.
so my next comment here, and these are just comments for us to further discuss, that this developer, although he's local, certainly, if one looks into their business plan, the way that they conduct their business, they buy multi-family apartments, developments, and then they're known to keep them for maybe 5 to 7 years and then resell. So I'm not sure that we could count on this developer as being a long-term neighbor. Maybe we can, but looking at their company information, it's not their norm to do that. And then the next comment that I would like to make is that the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary has, and this was told to me directly by somebody in authority at the seminary, that they have rented apartments to students who have graduated. And certainly, we have sympathy for people who don't make a lot of money, but those students who graduate and then take a full-time employment are not students and they're not employees. Therefore, there's a question of whether the seminary has breached the Dover Amendment. And that's something that we need to look at very carefully in our negotiations with the seminary. The seminary, not currently, but certainly past administration at the seminary has been, shall we say, less than candid and less than forthcoming with some of the promises that they made to the town. And so I want to make 1,000% sure that the town is not overlooking any opportunity to make sure that a development agreement is as favorable to Hamilton as possible.
I appreciate those comments, Rosie. I would ask, in light of that, what else would you like to see in this agreement that would meet that criteria?
Well, I think the seminary may have to think about its receipt, its financial gain from this development, from the developer, that it may need to rethink how much it's willing to settle for, because the developer, if we're really working hard to get 25% affordable units, which would help this town immensely, it would put to rest all the fear, anxiety, cost to town infrastructure, that we would have certainty that there isn't going to be something coming down the pike. And this would help the town and greatly, and it would also help the seminary to atone for maybe some of the issues in the past and become a very good neighbor to the town. So I would like to see this issue of whether the Gordon Conwell Seminary breached its Dover Amendment, and how badly did they breach it, and is it something that can be rectified by renegotiating with the developer to accept a lower price in exchange for 25% from the developer, so that it would be a very positive experience for the seminary, for the developer, and for the town of Hamilton, who is such an integral player in the seminary for decades and decades.
So I think, just to clarify, currently the developer is on board so far with 25%, and so is Gordon Conwell. So I guess.
I think Gordon Conwell said that they reached an agreement with the developer to do 10 to 25%. So
Yeah,
But
but our agreement then they don't control how much the end developer decides to do. The developer does, and that's why we have a second agreement in here directly with the developer, because the developer actually negotiates with the town, not Gordon Conwell. Now, for us to say that we require that Gordon Conwell make it a condition of the sale that it be 25%, I mean, we could, John, I would defer to you, like, we could do that, but if we thwart Gordon Conwell from being able to sell, we then take a developer who's already told us that they're willing to work with us at 25%, and we sort of inadvertently agitate the whole sale, which could make all parties less, convivial about the 25%. So I just want to go back to the question about, like, when we look at these specific two agreements, what language are we asking to be added?
Well, there isn't any agreement from the other side yet. This is our high-level draft of an agreement between the developer and the town of Hamilton. So we don't have anything from them saying that they're going to provide 25% of affordable
Right, but these are
housing.
our draft agreements,
That's
and there's
right.
two. There's one between us and Gordon, and one between us and the
That's
developer. And I'm hearing you say that you want us to sort of push harder.
Yep.
And I'm saying if this is the mechanism by which we push harder, what language would you like us to add, or what conditions would you like us to add to these documents to meet those expectations?
Well, I think John just made a statement that to get 25% affordable units, the developer may ask to pay a lower purchase price, and we don't know if a seminary is going to be willing to do that. So I think the reality is this is a three-way negotiation. And so I would like to see the seminary doing its share of accepting, if it was necessary, if the developer said, well, we'd have to pay you less if we're going to agree to the town's 25% request on affordable housing. So then Gordon Conwell would have to be on board with that, in a sense, voluntarily take a lower amount, knowing that it would benefit the town of Hamilton, who has benefited the seminary and its students for decades and decades.
So that would then be in our development agreement with Gordon Conwell. We would require that the sale of residential use, anything that's for residential use, would require 25% at 80% AMI. So I guess, John, you could add that into the development agreement?
So that's paragraph E
It is, in there.
of the draft with
already in
the seminary. So what I did, and I kind of anticipated Rosie's question, because we had talked about this,
Right.
Joe and I talked about this way back when. We originally, if I could just kind of digress for a second, Madam Chair, we originally had talked about an agreement solely with the seminary, because the seminary controls the 102 acres. The planning board was working diligently on an overlay district for 102 acres. A lot of time and energy was spent on that. And then the seminary kind of shifted gears and said, we're not interested in conveying the 102 acres or redeveloping it. We're just interested in the lower residential dormitory piece. Unbeknownst to the town, there was a development agreement or a purchase and sale agreement entered into with a third party. So we now have an arrangement between the seminary and the third party that the town cannot interfere with. So all the town can do now is to negotiate with both parties. And the way I drafted this development agreement is kind of belt and suspenders. So the 25%, if that's the number the select board wants to push for, that requirement is in both development agreements. And so that would kind of respond to the concern of, we're kind of dealing with an entity we're not familiar with, the developer, but we are familiar with the seminary, so let's get that restriction in place. So we've done that. I don't think we need to have it in both if the conversations with those two parties go well, but for now, it's in both drafts.
Okay.
I just, Carolyn May, so Carolyn and I met with the new owners today over Zoom, briefly, just to introduce the concept of an agreement with them, and they were open to it, and they were okay with the 25%. So I told them that, subject to what the select board decides tonight, we'd be presenting them with a draft agreement for them to review and respond to, and that 25% was gonna be our request on that, and they didn't flinch at that. So I'm cautiously optimistic that both parties, we've already had the same conversation with President Sundquist. So cautiously optimistic that, as you've requested, Rosie and Bill, we've put 25% in the draft agreement, and that'll be part of our request when we present that to them.
You know, if I could just add one more piece, thank you, Joe, for raising that, because one of the things a municipality never knows is the future of a proposed transaction as between the developer and the seminary. We have no control of it. You'll never know. It's behind closed doors. So it's entirely possible, I'm not suggesting anything, but it's possible that the agreement between the developer and the seminary won't be fulfilled. It'll fall apart. In that case, the benefit of having this restriction in the seminary agreement means the select board won't have to revisit this every time there's a new suitor for the residential units. So that's really the approach here.
So I
Yeah,
had a
and
couple
I think
things.
we've been painfully transparent, I think, on both sides that, you know, I don't quote me on these numbers, but I think there's, 209 units, and to Rosie's earlier comment, like, that either meets or slightly less, maybe it's slightly more than fulfills our full SHI 10% safe harbor number. So we're very motivated to make sure that, you know, if this goes through that 25% number, especially if we were able to get all 100%. Now, obviously, if we don't, that puts whatever the number, I can't do the math, 40, what is it?
Maybe
40, 50
52,
units or so
50,
on,
52,
on
51.
our,
But we don't know how many are vacant, right? Because if only 100, if 100 are used already, and there's only 100 that can go into, you know, some type of the 25%, now you cut it in half, right?
No. It is based on the number of units in the development. And
But
that was
they-
what we're
but they
saying.
can't
that even if they're
guarantee
already
80%
occupied,
income.
we are saying that of this entire development, 25% needs to be, if 100 are occupied, they then would have to disproportionately allocate the remaining units to meet that 25%
It would have
affordable.
to be 100, right? All of them would
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to be.
We're basically saying we need 50 affordable units in this building. If there's 200 units and 100 of them are occupied, the remaining 150 of them are gonna be, you know, count towards that, that number.
Well, when it changes hands, the issue is 25% of the 209 apartments.
Right.
So I don't think whoever's there, living there now or not living there is relevant to the sale of all the units.
Right.
Right.
They'll have to reapply to,
Exactly.
with the new.
Exactly.
And
Right.
in order for it to count as affordable housing units, there are rules, state and federal rules and guidelines
Exactly.
about how those units get filled. There's a lottery process and everything else that they have to that the developer has to do. So we know that the people that go into the affordable units will have met those requirements because it's very strict about how they do that.
Yeah, but according to President Sundquist, when I met with him last month, he felt very secure that he has a lot of diversity in the residents, and so they would hopefully be eligible for the local preference lottery. So that's one way they could help their residents as well. So anyhow, there are a lot of ways to do it, but just wanted to clarify that if the apartments are sold, it would be en masse, 209 units, and 25% of those would be, we are requesting, would be reserved for affordable. And then whatever needs to be worked out is between the state and the developer. They would manage the fair housing and so forth, however they do it. We do know it can be done, and so that's why I think this is a good opportunity for the seminary, it's a good opportunity for the town, and why not work hard to make it happen?
So the only other thing I might add in section E, you know, based on Rosemary's comments, is if it changes hands in 5 to 7 years, do we need to protect ourselves on the sale of the property and that this restriction remains with the property?
So great question, and that is why in both agreements I reference 184, sections 31 and 32. So many folks in the audience are probably familiar, and I know the select board's familiar with conservation restrictions. It's the same statutory section. So in Massachusetts, in order to have a restriction be perpetual, the requirement is to impose a conservation or, in this case, an affordable housing restriction. So the reason for imposition of an affordable housing restriction is the restriction would run with the land perpetually. So if the first developer is developer A and developer A sells to developer B and then to C, the restriction has run with the land perpetually. So by the time it gets to developer Z, it's still in place. And that's really kind of the holy grail of restrictions. Otherwise, they will expire. In Massachusetts, they expire after 30 years if they're not re-recorded. So this would be the assurance that the units would remain affordable in perpetuity.
That'd be great.
Okay. So I just want to be mindful that, you know, we talk a lot about what we hope and what we want to do, but this is the method through which we're doing those things. And so, and I know that for some folks, this is maybe the first time we're seeing it, but we're in a bit of not a crunch, but like we do need to decide what the terms of these agreements are going to be and if there's anything we're going to add or adjust. And so I sort of give it back to the board to say, like, what further process would y'all like to go through to ensure that this represents the needs that we've heard and that we want in here? Because again, we can talk about how we want to do X, Y, and Z, but this is the method through which we do it. It is these two agreements that we're putting together to give to, you know, the seminary and the developer. And so if those things are not represented here, we need to make sure that they become represented here in fairly short order.
So could we take these, have until our next meeting to provide edits, and then we can talk about it again at our next meeting? And then present it to the respective parties?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fine. I would say, Joe, as far as they have a 60-day due diligence that we are,
Couple weeks
how
into
far
it.
into?
I think we're a couple weeks into it. Maybe
Okay,
3 weeks into it, so you've got,
Still have time.
you got about,
so,
Well, we should talk about these then, if that's what we want to do, because there's some, I mean, and thank you, John, for highlighting in yellow, but I think if we hit those comments, or especially in the developer agreement, I'll call it, you know, that might be helpful to make sure next time we come together, we're prepared to make a final decision. I think the one with Gordon seems pretty buttoned up, maybe just the contribution, you know, when that monetary contribution is paid, you know, we could discuss, but the one with the developer is wide open. I mean, I don't think it's, you know, should we talk as a group about what numbers we should put in there?
yeah, I mean, I also, when I ask about the process question, like, I hate to delay things 14 or 28
Yeah.
days when we each need 15 to 90 minutes to go through it. You know, I am curious when you say it's wide open with the developer, namely because I just don't know.
So we have a blank for monetary contribution to the town for impact of future services. That's the biggest one, I would say.
I will say
Yeah,
that one
I
might be
wonder
the,
though, I mean, Joe, you know, how, given that the developer does not have, you know, a lot of these are altruistic things, right? They're not requirements by any stretch. Like, we haven't talked about a monetary contribution from the developer. I think that will surprise them. I mean, not that it's not something to ask for, but I would like us to have a perspective on, like,
well,
That's why I
mean,
brought it
what
up.
end are we
for-
adding things
in-
to this agreement with the developer?
so, I mean, the developer may come back and say, look, fees for impact of services, that's what we're gonna pay taxes for. That's generally what they'd say if we were asking the developer to make some kind of,
Mitigation.
yeah, mitigation, if we were asking the developer to help us make, you know, improve one of the roads leading to where they're gonna enter and exit, or things like that, we could ask for a financial, contribution to make those improvements to Woodbury and Essex, or Woodbury and Bridge, or something. John can help outline some of the other things that are typically allowed in a mitigation agreement.
So do
And
we
we'd
have
have to
any-
sign a
do we have
cost to them,
any-
but for services, police, fire, schools, that's why they pay taxes. We're not gonna
Yeah, that's what I was
probably
gonna
move
say.
them on
Do we have
that.
any financial research on when we're requesting what those mitigation is? Like on servicing with plows, sidewalks, trash, schools, like the impact on the schools, like there's gonna be a cost to the town for the overall
The
services. that we
trash is
provide.
likely gonna be separate because it's a development, and they're probably not gonna be picked up by the town. We don't pick up, in places that have more than 2 units.
So should we, we
So
should probably have that in the.
We should probably include that they'll have to do,
Private road,
right?
it's a private road. It's just about their entrance on to the 2 public ways.
Cause I didn't
So-
see that in there, but we should have that in there as well. They're gonna be on private trash and maintain their own roads and all of that. But, there is gonna be bedrooms with children that are gonna be entering our school system. Do we have like any sort of, is there any precedent for what per child impact would be, financially? And then we can start looking at numbers of what that might look like from a.
Again, they're gonna be tax-paying. We tried to do this with Gordon Conwell over the years, and
They're
trying to
on
get
lease,
it.
right? What do we think the tax, because that's all part of, I like where you're going. What do we think we'll get for revenue from taxes on there? It's probably gonna be lower than an average for sure, on the number of units.
Yeah, so it's gonna be taxed differently. It's not gonna be, so if it was a house or condo, you'd tax at the full value of the property. You're not gonna be able to do that. In this case, you're taxing one owner for all of the units. So there's a different calculus that has to be done by the Board of Assessors. They'll look at similar types of developments in neighboring towns, because we don't really have anything like that here in this town. the closest thing would be the 18 units on Willow Street, but that's not really a good comp for the level of impact. So we have to look at what is, Beverly Danvers doing with apartment buildings of this size, and try to draw that over as a comp and apply some,
And according to our housing production plan, a development this size would be a net positive to a town, at least statistically. We would need to look at that, but there's a good chance that we wouldn't be losing money, unfortunately, such as we're doing on the Willow Street flats. But we knew that going into it, that wasn't going to be a moneymaker, so.
So you're saying, I don't know that this is a net positive based on the increase to services, the school systems, everything.
Just statistically, I think looking at our housing production plan, and I don't know if we have enough time to really parse that out. Maybe our DPW person would be able to provide some numbers. But I do think mitigation usually depends on payments for infrastructure that's required outside of the development, such as roads or a sidewalk or water lines or things like that, right? Is that, I mean, that's the way I understand it. And those are accessible numbers for us to look at.
We just have to determine if there is any kind of improvement to public infrastructure that needs to be made to accommodate this reuse. That's.
Yeah, but we have talked
be
about
tough.
that Woodbury Street intersection, which is fairly treacherous. And if you're talking about 400 people in those apartments, that's a substantial number of cars. And so, hey, we need some mitigation.
So we certainly get DPW to give us an estimate on what it would take to improve, not just that intersection, quite frankly. I think the intersection at Essex and Woodbury is even more fraught. That's
exactly what I mean, I'm sorry.
The one at Bridge Street, both intersections could be improved to handle the new level of traffic and would benefit our residents, because the intersection at Essex and Woodbury is already kind of dangerous.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. That's the one I was referring
So I know Tim's already got some rough figures for that intersection anyway, so we could extrapolate that out over both intersections and ask for that, for assistance with that.
I have a question. Maybe this is for John and his experience, but I mean, it sounds like this is a voluntary donation, so it's like we have any sort of leverage here. So, I mean, we want to get a maximum value from the developer, but we also don't, they can tell us to go pound sand. So what is the right balance between, we don't want to go too high and have them be like, what are you talking, but we also want to make sure, is there some sort of threshold that we should be looking at, or certain criteria we should be looking at when we're going in with a certain number?
So if this were a special permit application or even a comprehensive permit application, and by the way, one of the restrictions in the agreement with the seminary is no further or no future comprehensive permits as an agreed upon restriction. But if this were a special permit or a comprehensive permit, then the zoning board could negotiate conditions of approval that were tethered to the development. So the development impacts can be offset by conditions, including monetary conditions of approval. Here, we don't have an adjudicatory process. We don't have the select board or the ZBA or the planning board issuing a special permit. What we don't know is what will happen with the apartment developer when they seek a building permit, whether or not they will have to obtain a special permit from the Board of Appeals. That is entirely possible. If that happens, then that tethering of impact to offset is perfected. Here, the select board can't demand anything because there's no permit being requested from the select board. So it's a long-winded answer to say, here's the balance. The developer is looking for a profit. The town is looking for protection for the neighborhood and at least 25% of the units counting on the SHI. So that's kind of the delicate balance. If you push too far, will the developer simply walk? Probably not, but maybe the developer rescinds kind of oral agreements that are included in this draft. So I think there's a lot of politics here, and I think how you resolve this is knowing how far to push the developer before they say none of these terms are acceptable. So we have the 25%. It sounds like they've at least temporarily committed to that. I don't think they would put up too much noise or make too much noise about the off-site road improvements because it benefits their tenants. Anything that improves their project, in my experience, developers are willing to pay for because they see it benefiting themselves. So I think anything that the board considers as a win-win for both the developer and the town, I think are worth pushing forward. I think cash is the least likely a developer is going to be willing to make, but road improvements, utility improvements, infrastructure improvements. We've talked in the past about the problem that the seminary and the developer has with the wastewater treatment plant. That has to be resolved. There cannot be multiple owners of a large wastewater treatment plant over 10,000 gallons per day without DEP approval. And I rarely have seen DEP approve that kind of scenario for obvious reasons. The seminary is going to control the plant. What if they shut off the plant? Or what if they fail to maintain the plant? What happens to the 209 units? So that's a serious infrastructure issue. And the reason I raise that is another issue that the developer should be willing to negotiate with the town, with the select board, because they really need your assistance to make sure that DEP will approve these reciprocal easements that are going to be needed. So I think anything that benefits both the developer, profit, and security, and the town, which is the SHI, road and utility offset and improvements, and access to open space, local preference, any of those conditions, the developer really, in my experience, will not object to because they're not cost significant and they actually benefit the project. So I'm not sure I've answered your question directly. I think it's a lot of politics here, how far the select board are willing to push without pushing too far and doing all of this in a public.
Yeah, I think you did. I think it makes sense, as Joe was saying, to speak to DPW and see what actual improvements could be made. If we could find some concrete, examples of improvements, I think that, I like that idea.
Yeah, so maybe we change section B from monetary to improvement of infrastructure and services improvements or something like that?
Yeah, again, if the developer's benefiting using their own money, that is one of the few least objectionable conditions that boards put in permits, and developer seems okay with it because, again, they see themselves paying for their own benefit. The other thing kind of important to note here is we only have a draft of an approval not required plan that the seminary has floated. So we're not exactly sure even where the lot lines will be. That's important relative to stormwater management, for example. And we're also not exactly sure what the future rehab of these units are going to be. It's entirely possible that 209 units won't survive, that in fact there'll be fewer of them. And again, that's the difficulty of trying to negotiate something that isn't fully formed. We don't have their proposal as yet. So we're doing this a little bit in advance to try and get a negotiation with the two parties before they put everything in stone. Once that happens, it becomes a lot more difficult for us to negotiate with them.
So, in respect to time then, I like kind of coming up with some infrastructure service, maybe something to your point, John, if it helps the developer, we lay that out in here and get his agreement, that becomes section B. Keep the 200,000 with the seminary, but should we send this over with a watermark of draft to all parties so we start aligning on where our heads are at? Or is that not advised?
Could I offer a way forward that might be easier, and then John will tell me if I'm going in the wrong direction. But we still have to negotiate these with the two other parties on the other side. So and the negotiating will be myself and Caroline. I'm contractually required to do that. And Caroline is the chair. So if you could send, each of you and Bill Olson could send any recommendations you have to us, we can work with John to update that document. Don't send it to each other. Send it only to us. We'd send you the updated document with everybody's, and then respond back just us. And then that's our jumping off point for open up negotiations with each party. And then, because then you'll actually have to have a public vote and discussion about what the final document is after negotiations. Does that sound okay to you, John?
Yeah, it does. And in my transmittal note to Joe on Thursday, I made it clear, and I think Joe agrees with me, that these documents are a public record. Obviously, we're in a public setting. So from here on, that back and forth is entirely appropriate. Just watch out for the open meeting law. Do everything, as Joe said, directly to Joe. Yeah, that makes good sense, Joe.
Okay.
So do
Okay, the
we?
last
So you don't
thing I
need a
heard was
meeting
just
to do this. We can
codifying
do it in between.
the assumption
I'm
that
just
we
trying to,
will
I'm
not
sensitive
own
to the 60
public
days that we're 2
services.
weeks into, that's all. But, and I didn't know if it would help even to get, because, right, we're working in isolation, everyone, right now. You've had some discussions, but it'd be good if they started thinking directionally what we're thinking, you know, filling a few things in. And then I would also just question this board. Do you think, how much time do you think we need to really add something that's material, that's not in here right now? Because I think we just talked about the two biggest things in my opinion. I'll have it to you by 9, but.
All right, well, we can do it within the next 2 weeks and have the expectation that it would be on our agenda for more of a final discussion and vote in 2 weeks. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm just like, what am I not thinking about then that I would want to put into this that we haven't just,
So if I could go back to what my suggestion was, if
yeah, we heard it.
if we come to another meeting and you take a vote, like this is what, if we wait for that vote and then the negotiation changes it, then you have to re-vote and people are gonna be asked why you're changing your mind. I think we can try to do it a little bit with a paper trail, and not violate open meeting law and move it along a little faster. But,
Well,
I mean,
but I
the
think
process is totally yours, so.
Yeah, I think the reality is if the negotiation is going well, I think parties would waive the 60-day rule and continue along, right? Right, John?
Yeah, I think, frankly, I think the developer has kind of bigger fish to fry than worrying about this agreement. I really do. This is a significant project, and the draft that's before the board now is really not a big ask from the developer, especially if the board swaps out infrastructure improvements rather than the monetary contribution. There's only 200 units on the site. The site can't be further expanded. The restriction on bedrooms is perfectly reasonable. The affordable housing restriction is consistent with the developer has said publicly about, or at least orally, about the 25%. So there's really nothing in this agreement that is complicated for the developer. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable to hear from the select board. Let's make this as broad as the select board thinks it can be and should be within the bounds of the law, and then ask for a response from the developer. Yeah, I think that makes good sense.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is, we talked about a couple of changes, the infrastructure stuff. Joe, you're going to, if there's any specific things we want to call out, the intersection, things like that, we should figure out what those are. I think the other thing we talked about was codifying the agreement that we are not owning the facilities and services for the building. I mean, I think you said that's sort of assumed, but I think we talked about putting in there. And then any additional comments, I think I agree, if we can do those over email over the next week and a half, we can then show a draft to them, come back to the board at our next meeting with comments from the developer themselves for that part of it. I mean, we could do the same for Gordon Conwell, honestly, if we wanted to, if we get it closer. I agree that I don't think it's worth waiting until our next meeting and then going to the developer, because there's nothing, we wouldn't take a vote on it in that meeting anyway, because we wouldn't have shown it to we would want to take a vote on something that we've had some agreement with the developer, correct?
Yeah, and I think the select board and Joe and I, we collectively need to be really careful here, which is, this is the town's suggested draft. There is a really formal public process here. We're entering into a contract potentially. So I think the select board should feel confident that you can change this agreement anytime you feel it's appropriate, up until the time the ink is dried. So I think the board shouldn't feel pressured about leaving something out or putting something in that you can't take out. There'll be plenty of time to be flexible here.
Yeah.
And that schedule is driven by the select board, not by outside parties. So I would urge you not to feel pressure. I understand the developer feels pressure or the seminary feels pressure. but the board should not feel pressure.
So even if the 60-day due diligence period expires and they move forward, we still are not outside of our window to do this? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, because again, the way the apartment developer agreement is drafted is there's nothing here and nothing we've said tonight that would be a deal breaker for the developer. Any developer, and this is an experienced developer, has to know that the town is going to push for mitigation payments or offsets, and has to know that there's infrastructure issues. We've raised that for 2 years now. I've raised that with the parties. So there's no question that they expect something. I don't think the board has a time pressure here. If you're told otherwise, then I'll be corrected. But I don't see any need to feel pressure.
It will be the first time in the history of your life you've been wrong, John.
I've been wrong before. I've been wrong before. This would be an okay one to be wrong on, because if there is pressure, then the applicant, the developer in the seminar really should be telling the board that. And I have not heard that.
Yep. Okay. Are we all aligned? Do folks
So
feel?
should we, yeah, I think I love the approach. Should we consult the schools on what they think the impact would be? Is that on 209?
We have a cost per student number that we use for budgeting purposes, and I think we could probably pull that number, and then I think we'd have to do some sort of back of the napkin math on how many, families with students based on size of bedroom. I mean, I think it's going to be incredibly artificial math, but I think we could get to a number using existing data sets if we want something referential.
Yeah, no, and I think the school should also just be aware, as they make decisions about buildings and classrooms and such, of potential infusion of.
I mean,
we could, yeah, it's a $40 million
had such
budget,
an
right, with
impact.
1,700 kids. There's your math.
Yeah, but I would say over time, they've been a reasonable consideration for the schools as is, right? We've educated a fair number of children from families living on the seminary, and so it wouldn't be a net gain relative to what we've seen in the past. I think, when those apartments were full, there were children there that went into the schools.
There definitely were, but I think there'll be more with this.
Yeah. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm happy for us to move to the new business section, but I don't want to cut anybody off.
No, I think we're good. I think by Friday, Monday, we should have comments back.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. All right. We have a couple of items under new business.
Thank you.
Thanks, John, so much.
Thanks,
Are
John.
you staying? Is John staying for Amicus or no?
We wouldn't be using John for that. We'd be
Oh,
using
okay.
KP Law.
We're not using you, John. We have some.
Okay, good night. Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
So we have two items of new business to discuss. The first is flag and sponsorship policies, and the second is the filing of an amicus brief with the Supreme Judicial Court. I'm not going to use the T word, but I'm tempted on the flag and sponsorship policies because Bill is not here and he wrote the most recent version, I believe, of our flag policy, and I think Tom, you and Bill had worked on that, and he has more history on that. That said, I know there are people in the room that have come to have this conversation, so I just want to make sure we're prepared to have the conversation.
Table.
Table means to a different day.
Okay, so we are tabling.
No. She was, a resident asked what the T word was, and we were
Sorry.
explaining. That's all.
Sorry, the T word, table.
Table.
Tom, are you tabling it?
Tom, are you tabling?
Tom is tabling it.
All right, awesome. I would also like to, for when we put this on the agenda next, I would like us to have some maybe additional background on if we're looking to revisit or if we're looking to clarify or if we're looking to communicate. I know we do not currently have room policies. We've talked about that. We would need to draft something, so that could be its own item, but we have a flag policy. I would just want to understand, like, we just redid that policy, I think, a year ago. So just some clarity on what we're looking to do for those two things would be great. The second new business item is the filing of an amicus brief with.
But I think with that, though, sorry, Caroline, just so we can make sure, with that, we wanted to talk about sponsorships and, you know, our brand and our name being on documents and things that happen in rooms, on property, even on flagpoles. So, I mean, I think that, I'm still happy to table it, but I mean, I think that's the broad discussion I want to have on all three of those.
Yep.
Yeah, because the flag really wasn't, I think this came about because of the room discussion that we had last meeting. You guys had, the royal we,
Yeah.
you guys had. And then I just brought up about the picnic and the sponsorships of it. And then I think I wrote a letter to you guys. It's like, I never hear anything back, but I'm assuming you got it. That, you know, thinking about the land use and the sponsorship of, so sponsorship, land use, and rooms don't have to be coupled with a flag. I mean, that is right now its own specific issue. I'm happy to welcome that, but I wouldn't want it to be coupled, because I think that there's an overarching policy about how town property should be used and for what purpose, and whether activism on either side or religious activities or things that are not unified for Hamilton. I really would encourage this. We've waited here through long discussions for these topics, and is it possible that I was surprised that it was a flag policy, because that really wasn't what the intention was of what I sent and what was talking about. It was really about the room and about the sponsorship and land. So is it possible that we can decouple the flag? Because I think that's getting merged in, and then it becomes kind of a topic about the flag. And I think there's a bigger topic, which is how our tax dollars, which are funding the library, the cultural society, the town, the Patton Homestead, these are all, our tax dollars are using all of this. And I think there should be a policy about the way town dollars are used for things that are not for everybody, without cultural invasion, which is very divisive. And I really would encourage the town, we need to have a policy, and it started with the room. And my recommendation was to say, just say no. You know, if you say no to the rooms, no to the land, no to sponsorships, you can't use Hamilton Wenham on things which makes it look like the town is sponsoring it. The fire department should not be advertising for things that are privately run. You know, I think that there's an overarching policy that's, you know, the flag is maybe some component of it, but I know you have a flag policy that can be addressed, but there's a bigger issue here at play.
So you're asking us to bifurcate the issues, flag and then
The flag was never part of the discussion the last week or on any of our stuff. And someone put the flag into it because of the topic. And what I'm saying is, let's separate the topic and focus on the process. And the process is neutral. The process is, what do we do with our tax dollars? How are they to be funded and allocated? And why are we sponsoring things? And I know, Joe, you said that there was no money, but it said sponsorship and in-kind donation. And what is that in-kind donation? And how can they be using the logo? How can a political activist, and it's right on the website, how can they use our logos? Why is the library and the librarian
I can't speak about the library.
funding
I can't
these things?
I can't speak about the library.
But these are tax dollars. We pay for the librarian.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but you've asked me a question. I'm trying to answer it. Can I answer it?
Sure.
Okay, I can't answer for the library. The library's run separately, and it's run through the town of Wenham. So we get a bill, and we pay our portion of the bill, and that's our contribution to the library. The library has its own policies, and the Board of Library Trustees determines how they use these rooms. As far as the other stuff, there was no money given. That we did not tell them that we were endorsing their event. We did not tell them that we wanted to be sponsors. In fact, I've had it since you folks raised it to me. I didn't even know that they had listed as a sponsor. Since you folks had raised it to me, we've had a conversation with them and told them that we don't want any of our stuff to be listed as sponsors in the future, because we don't want to be seen as giving anybody any kind of special treatment. We did with them, as our Patton Homestead rental agreements do. We rented the property to them for the day. They paid the fee that they're supposed to pay. They're a nonprofit. They're registered 501c3, so they got their 10% discount. That was all. Okay, sorry, but they got their 10% discount, and that was all we did. We didn't do anything else for them. We didn't do anything else at all for them.
Was the Hamilton Human Rights Commission involved at all in any
The
aspect
Hamilton
of
Human
it?
Rights Commission had a tent there, which they've done every year in the past.
It's only been there for 3 years. I mean, this is a relatively recent event, so that's why I think it's important to really establish what the guidelines and rules are on it.
So Hamilton, when the Human Rights Commission was told to participate in things that would help human rights in the community, they partnered with the Wenham Human Rights Commission. They both had tables there, but they didn't, again, there was volunteer hours from the members of the commission, and
Should a town,
And
should
in their
a
tent,
town
there wasn't even a town's
committee,
tent.
should a town committee, under your authority, participate in drag events? I mean, are our town policies going to participate in sexualization and
So
grooming of
maybe,
children?
maybe the first question
that's
is,
just
are we
a
going to
question.
bifurcate
Yeah.
these issues and
Thank
put
you.
in table the flag policy?
Yeah, I do think that
will we talk
it's its
about
own
this?
topic about, because I have that same question relative to when we rent property, you know, what can we vet up front and say yes or no to? Maybe we need to know a list of all the vendors and everything that'll be there, because I personally, unless I'm missing something, don't understand the connection with Drag Makeup 101 there. And some of this stuff that I'm seeing, you know, is really like coupled with our names on a pamphlet, and even sponsored by different departments in our town. I mean, where should we be in the middle of that? Because anybody goes on that site, it looks like it was our event, basically. The town of Hamilton, town of Wenham, the schools, and the library.
I
I
understand.
mean, so I want to make sure, you know, especially sitting in this seat, that someone, you know, like had I known that, like, did we know that when we approved it? Should we ask that and make that part of a policy? We need to understand everything that's going to be in, you know, present of the day of this event and that type of stuff. What can we do when, you know,
Right,
we
and
rent our
should we
property?
is the question.
Right.
That's
What's
being
our
asked.
legal
Yeah,
right?
I
'Cause
want to be careful that, so I think sponsorship, which I think we've all said, like, we didn't knowingly sponsor it, so there's that. But then I think the other question Deb is asking is around use of land, and I think, I agree with you, Bill, like, that's a very, very, very complex topic, because we're talking Patton Park, Patton Homestead, COA, library, which is a regional agreement. We don't even have authority over the library in that way. You know, town hall when it comes to it, but the Patton Homestead, as we've said, like, they host weddings and parties there. And if we're gonna get into the business of saying, you can only host a wedding here if you meet the following criteria, like, I think we need to audit all of, when we say town property, what are we talking about? And are there certain this, that, and the other? And I don't want to lead the charge on that, I'll be very honest, because I think we get into over sort of legislating or regulating individual uses for these things, because I don't think we can just say no because of the unique position that the homestead is in. They make money off of those events.
But I think the other part of that is, it sounds like citizens are asking us to look at what we're participating in. And I've not been to a Pride picnic, but what people are telling me happened, they're not happy about it. And so I do think that if we decided to separate types of events, a wedding or a graduation is very different than some of the activities that may have gone on at the Pride picnic. And I'm just raising the issue, can we parse out what we as a board think is acceptable on a broad basis, and not choose to participate in particular activities because they can definitely be seen as an activist type of
Yeah, I mean,
event.
I think the answer is we can do that, but I think
Right.
there's a lot of legwork we need to do in order to sort of figure out what these buckets are that we're talking about, and how we write the language so that it's, you know, done one way,
That's a
one
really
way or the other,
slippery
because
slope, I feel like. And I feel like we have to have pretty clear criteria of like what those buckets are. And I feel like the limitations have to be like around, you know, health and safety or things like that. I mean, like, because if we are now the governing board of what events we're going to now sponsor, it's either we sponsor no events or we sponsor all events with limited criteria of like excluding ones that are like, you know, jeopardizing health and safety or something like that, where, I mean, we shouldn't be in the business of saying like, well, we're gonna favor this one and we're not gonna favor this one, because then we're putting our own, feelings
Biases,
onto an activity, which is not our job. We either say no to any sponsored events or we allow most everything, right? It's a really slippery slope, and all of a sudden now there's a questionable activity that half the town supports and half the town doesn't support, and we're in the business of saying, do we allow it or don't we allow it? I mean, I don't think we want to be in that position.
Well,
And
maybe
the
we
picnic,
do.
I mean,
To
the picnic was
come up with a solution.
it was a non-mandatory event. There were tons of families there. It's just, it's a really difficult thing to say that we want to start regulating each of these different things and what we can and can't do. If a private group paid the fee to the Patton Homestead to host something there.
So maybe what we're saying is we don't want the town's logo put onto an event that we are not advocating for, right? We're not sanctioning this event, and maybe, is that maybe what people are saying? They don't want the town's logo on events that.
It was more than that, it was tax dollars.
But we didn't, I mean, there was a grant that was given through I think it's the Cultural Council, right? Which was actually state fund, it was a state grant that, from what I understand, went through the Cultural Council. But we as taxpayers did not authorize or sponsor or give money directly to the organization for the picnic.
But the discount they saw as a contribution.
But
in
any nonprofit organization that applies through Patton gets 10% off. That's not, the town didn't do that. The Homestead has a policy of a 10% discount for.
That's a town-owned, that's a town signboard. We run that, so.
Right, but like that, it wasn't unique to them. It was, if any nonprofit, if a breast cancer nonprofit came to us and said, we want to hold a fundraiser here on the Patton Homestead, we would offer 10% off of the rental fee for that.
I'm talking about the digital marketing board is.
I can't hear folks.
They're talking about the electronic signboard on 1A in front of the Public Safety Building, Council on Aging. Yeah, we've used that sign to advertise things that are open to the public in the past. That event, I think, has been advertised there a couple times in the past. In fact, 2 years ago, they were advertising the fact that they were offering rides to people who couldn't get there. So, but.
I hate to be pedantic.
No, it
but I'm
does.
just saying that if it's on the board and it's flashing and all the signs of Hamilton Wenham Pride Picnic, it's very much, and all the logos, it's very much a town sanctioned event.
Yeah, I agree the logo shouldn't be.
There was a right to life event, or there was a baptism, you wouldn't be having Hamilton flat, you just wouldn't do it, right? And it's culturally acceptable in this world that we live in, but it's not right because it's divisive. There's people who are very offended by that and aren't aligned with that, but it's not even about that one event. It's like, what is our towns putting their fingerprint on, their sponsorship of? And I just think that's the part that should be evaluated with some integrity.
Joe, Tosh Blake, Sagamore Street. I think some of the issues that come up here and what the town gets involved with was happening before with the flag policy as far as, again, this all happened very recently. 2020, there's a lot of political, let's say, not hysteria, but it was pretty heated and people pushed for certain things, certain precedents that people didn't do before. Like we used to just fly the American flag, maybe the POW flag, but generally thought of as non-political. Then some people wanted to get political flags flown on town property. There's a big debate of that was concurrent with the Supreme Court case, Shurtleff versus the City of Boston. And the town was like, I went to a lot of those meetings. The town was endlessly trying to hash out the kind of ways to get the flag that the current select board wanted, those, but also eliminate other flags that other people may want that they just simply politically didn't approve of. And my advice was just fly the American flag. Right. You don't have the town kind of maybe endorsing a certain point of view and excluding other points of view. It's called viewpoint discrimination, and this kind of may come into the venue question as well. And I pointed out to the select board at the time that they have a code of conduct, and that code of conduct says there's a couple sections of it. One of them is the select board members are not to put politics into town business. And another one was to represent, one point of code of conduct, represent the whole town. Well, if you're only approving through government speech certain political flags, and obviously it could be argued that the Pride flag and the Juneteenth flag are very political flags, it's in violation of the Code of Conduct. And I think a member that was here at the time, he said, well, the Code of Conduct is non-binding. Mr. Domolowitz has often spoken of best practices. I would say best practices would certainly not be to violate the Code of Conduct, but the Select Board at that time did that. And you get controversies like this where what is the public use of the town for? I think you have a dilemma where anyone wants to use the town property for a gathering, whether it's nonprofit or not. You could have all kinds of groups, decide to come and use the town property. You could have communists, you could have neo-Nazis, you could have pro-Hamas, pro-Israel, whatever, whatever the hottest button topics are, the town would have to, to not engage in viewpoint discrimination, to have a court case, allow it all. So maybe the town could say, we're allowing everything, but we're not going to promote anything. So if you put certain things on a billboard that the town owns, it looks like promotion. So people here have a point that, if you don't want to look like you're engaging in viewpoint discrimination, which the Supreme Court has come out against, that was the Shurtleff case, then you're kind of in a bind. So you have the Select Board, which created the Human Rights Committee or Commission, which is, you could say, maybe politically partisan, that subcommittee. And it's just a venue for one political side to say, well, we have official town approval, so we can get the town's sort of statement for supporting this group or that group. And that doesn't look, it looks kind of like a viewpoint discrimination. So I guess one way to just get out of the situation is allow all groups, whatever they are, or only allow sort of groups that aren't necessarily politically identified. But this is the same problem with the Code of Conduct, which kind of created this problem where we fly political flags, unfortunately, in this town, which the American flag, e pluribus unum, is supposed to represent everybody. And if you start elevating other groups that are sort of, they're special, you get into these problems. So I, like to maybe return to being neutral and having the government sort of have a very neutral viewpoint. Just like with Harvard University, they have these problems where they take stands and then, there's some controversy, now we have to be neutral. I think our town should go that way. Thank you.
Beth Her. I know some people have said this could be hard to figure out, and I think we need to collectively put our heads together to come up with a solution and not use it's hard as an excuse not to try to address it. I have a couple thoughts, and I'm sure I'll have more thoughts because that's how my brain works, but you could have in your contract about breaking laws or harming children, putting people at risk. If there is a code of conduct that we know that, I would think having the Hamilton Human Rights Commission being at an event where children are potentially being exposed to an act that might be violating the law would not be appropriate code of conduct. So that very much concerns me, hearing that they were actually participants in that. Again, a different thing. The signboard is showing, the logo showing, and then the Human Rights Commission from Hamilton being involved also all shows this, and then the library and all these other places. I think you could separate maybe public and private events and how you address public events. Clearly the Hamilton Wenham Human Rights Commission is advertising. It goes on all the public Facebook, and they're looking to invite the public in. A wedding, I'm not as concerned about because they're inviting their own guests. So those are just some of the things that have popped in my head. I'm sure with people here and people online, we can come up with some good ideas. And then my last concern is, are we opening us up to litigation? Because that would be a concern to me if this is something that somebody could end up suing us over, because it is something that potentially a child could be harmed at. I personally was sexually abused as a child, so I am very sensitive to grooming and anything that could in any way harm or potentially prepare a child to be harmed. So I just want to share that because that's my own journey, and it's something I take very seriously because I see things because of my own experience that you all might not see in advance. And these are some of the things, these are like slippery slopes that we're going down that could end up because none of us in this room want to see a child harmed. I mean, I think we're all in agreement on that. And sometimes we don't see the steps that could be leading into that direction. So thank you for your time.
Jeff Austin, I agree with everything Deb, Tosh, and Beth said. And it's not as divisive as just saying one group no or another. I don't think you should be in that business. There's the freedom of speech that was brought up by Joe last time we talked about this. But there's some basic vetting that Bill had brought up that's a good idea. Let's build some policies in, put them in contractual policies, like Beth said. Maybe it depends on whether it's a town group or a rentable option. But then put some policies in there and do some basic vetting. I mean, you see the paper you have in front of you. Basic vetting would have said this entertainer is not going to be on this site right now, especially if it's under town logos. I understand you didn't know that, but basic vetting and some policies. I don't pretend it's easy. It's a challenge, but we could do better. We could do better. Thank you.
I agree. I think the vetting piece up front, I mean, when others rent the facility, I mean, they need to come to us for liquor licenses for a day. There's a lot. So we should know, what's going to be presented there, because it is harmful, where I still like just this one, everything would have been fine except for this one. And where do you draw the line? What's there next year? So I think we got to mitigate future activities at something that was advertised in one way. And then there's things in there that I don't quite connect with a picnic.
I think also a part of that is the town's logo being used to promote that. That makes me a
It
little
is, but
uncomfortable.
still, I mean, that's
Yeah, it wasn't provided to them. They must have picked it up off the website. I mean, the town's
Then-
logo is public. It wasn't provided to them. We didn't ask them to
So
sponsor.
that group took
but-
license with the town's logo. That's a pretty serious infraction, I would think.
I mean, I don't know where they got it from, so.
Are they going to be sent a letter to say, please never do this again?
We've already expressed to them, we don't want to be listed as sponsors, and we don't want our logos used.
It was also on the town,
Yeah.
it was also on the town calendar that Lori runs as an event on the town website, Pride Picnic. And so it's an insidious thing. And I think that the point is private versus public, right? So if it's a private event that this 501c4 is hosting and they're paying for the land, if they actually paid for the land and it wasn't donated in kind as a donation, and it's their own private event, it therefore should not be a publicly advertised event, because it becomes a blurry line. It's either private or public, and they make it a public event by how it's advertised and how it's positioned. And this would be true for anything, right? I'm not picking on this one event. Okay, there's other events that other people would be very upset about having be advertised by the town. I might think are great. Tom might think are great, okay? But I think it should just be neutral. So the public-private distinction, I think Beth said that, I think that's a really important line. So let's make sure that if it's a private event, there's no logo, there's no advertising, there's no nothing. And I think there should be an evaluation of what the commission is doing, because you guys are oversight of that commission. They report to you. So I think that there's just important linkages to figure out, with what events they're sponsoring and what events other committees are sponsoring that blur those lines. Thank you so much.
Hello. Michael Madden, Highland Street. Firstly, I wanted to thank you for your vote of confidence in me tonight. So I appreciate that. I just want to continue a little bit of discussion about what we've heard. So if I heard correctly, the group we were just talking about have used our town logo, right? Without getting permission. Is that correct?
It would seem so. I mean, I haven't confirmed with them how they got it, but I know it wasn't intentionally provided to them by my office or anybody at Town Hall, so.
And we never voted, at least since I've been on the select board. I don't know what you folks did before I became a member, but
They the select board established the policies for rental of the property, and
But
that
that's
just followed
different
that.
than what we're
Right,
talking
but we
about.
didn't, right, I understand.
Right, just the
but we
question
didn't-
I'm asking is, did they get permission to use the town's logo, yes or no?
Not from me.
Not explicit permission, but I would say, when we are applying the level of scrutiny that we're applying to this, I think there were a lot of assumptions made about how things have happened in the past. And so I just want to be careful pointing fingers that they were being malicious or trying
Caroline,
to
sorry,
obfuscate. Because the commissions from both towns were involved, our human rights commissions, I'm sure that the assumption, and I think what we're saying here today is like, we no longer want that to be an assumption, was that these events were, you know, if not sponsored by, at least endorsed by Hamilton and Wenham, the same way that our pride flag raising was, you know, a Hamilton town event. So I don't want the conversation to devolve around like nefarious use of our logos and people trying to get the town involved in children grooming when it really wasn't the intent. Like, this is the first year that we've had this level of scrutiny because something came up that pushed it into a more divisive place. But again, the agenda was listed. The families that took their kids there knew that there was going to be these activities, and they were there, and they were celebrated at the time. And I think that's where we get into a space where we have to discuss, is it political or is it humanitarian? You know, if we're saying that it is okay for us to have a pride picnic, but it's not okay if that pride picnic includes drag performers, or that we're going to do background checks on the band members of anybody that comes to the park. I mean, I really want us to have a conversation about what it is that we're trying to avoid and what the checks and balances are to avoid those things.
So
This
I think
was,
it's
this was not a malicious, you know, thing that took place. It was the one event, which was advertised, which was drag makeup, which, by the way, the drag makeup person did not actually show, that was advertised, that was on the agenda, that people knew would be there. That seems to be the thing that tipped the scales. And now we're opening this up.
Well, I think
we can now audit all of this and look at it and decide what that policy will look like.
Yeah.
But I just,
So I think it sets a dangerous precedent that we are putting out there, that it's okay to use the town's logo. Any organization can do that. I know that's not what you're saying, but
Yeah,
that's
we're
the
not-
impression.
that's what I'm
So
saying.
I
I
would
think
like
we
to
can
ask the
tighten that up.
select
Now,
board
the
if we
name
can
of the
find out, did we give them approval to do that, yes or no? If we did not, and they
commission
went,
may
I'm sorry,
have. That's what I'm saying. The commission
Yeah.
may have given them that
Okay.
permission because the commission was involved.
And
The
does the
select
commission-
board specifically did not.
They wouldn't have the right to.
yeah, that's what I was
give-
going to ask.
give
Does the
our-
commission have
use
the
our
right to do
logo.
that?
I don't know. And this is what I'm saying. Like, now that we apply this scrutiny,
Yeah.
you know, if the Hamilton Development Corporation goes to a thing at Patton Park and they're representing Hamilton and they said, yeah, Hamilton's going to throw this thing, I can understand how our logo would end up on something because a committee or commission or board is a part of a thing.
So I think
And
we
I'm
should
not
find that out
excusing it. I'm
because other
saying
people
when
are
we
gonna
put this
start.
level of scrutiny on this event, we're going to find where those pockets are. And I think we need to audit all of the things that we're talking about and be prepared to have a conversation about what it is we're trying to avoid in the future and understand what things that will preclude in the spaces that we have. So, you know, if the Girl Scout troops want to have a meeting at the library, they can't do it anymore. Like, is that what we're saying? Because it's not town government.
So
I
the
think we
question
need to
I'm
go through this
asking
process
is,
in more than a
did they get
9,
permission
10
to use the
PM.
town's logo, yes or no? And, you know, if we don't know that answer tonight, maybe we could find it for the next meeting. And then following that, I would like to ask the select board to consider revoking their charter for this abuse. Because there's no way can anyone here in the select board tell me, I believe it was Ellen was the lady's name, she gave you all copies of that drag queen's social media. Can anyone on the select board tell me how that relates to human rights? Anybody?
I
You
think
can't
that
because it doesn't.
Drag performances, drag makeup, drag story hours have sort of become part of the pantheon of Pride events.
I
That is
didn't
what I'm
mention
saying is
pride.
that's
I'm
what's
not even
tripped
talking
this
about that. I'm
conversation.
talking about this person, which is in those printouts that you're all giving. Caroline, if you could see what's in there, it is filth. It is disgusting. It is horrendous to think that we would invite them onto our property and put them up in front of our children. And it has
I'm
no
not disagreeing.
relation
I'm saying in
whatsoever
order
to
for us
human
to
rights.
productively move forward, I think there's a lot of work that we have to do to understand what is the goal of the policy, what is the impact of the policy, what is the properties that we're talking about, and what do and don't we have purview over.
Yeah,
And
and take a look at those
We can't do that
printouts
tonight. That's not
and
what's going to
tell
happen.
us
I
how
think
that
it has
relates
be
to
a work
human
stream.
rights. It is filth, it is disgusting, and it is endangering young children. It really is. And this needs to stop. It needs to stop. Thank you.
You know, I do think there are ways that we need to think about using our town-owned properties. I mean, I think I also was thinking about Girl Scouts or a dance recital. That's pretty politically neutral. I mean, I don't think anybody in town would object to those sort of neutral parties using our facilities. And so that is something we need to think about when we make our policy. I think that's exactly why I said I was holding off editing that policy, because there's a lot of discretion there. And I thought, well, what does that mean, discretion for what? There needs to be a policy. We need to think about what we're going to allow and what we're not going to allow. And I think in terms of the flag policy, not that we're discussing that particular issue, but the fact that it was going to be deemed government speech. Well, for us to decide who would use our facilities is also government speech. And we want to adopt a policy that is acceptable townwide, I would think.
All right, well, in the interest of everyone's bedtime, I am going to move to our last agenda item, but I think Joe or Rosie, I think we're just gonna have to sort of appoint outside of this, some subgroup of folks that wanna sort of take on the first leg of looking at this and figuring out what a policy would be.
So I
and how
didn't
wanna
put in
do
your
it.
packets the letter that we sent to Secretary Keneally back in, I think it's 21 or 22. And I did take the liberty of discussing this with Town Council. Town Council, KP Law, is working with another of their municipal clients to draft an amicus brief for them. And they said that there have been inquiries from a couple of other towns as well as us. So they'd be happy to work with us if that's what the board wishes to do. They'd be able to bring in some of what is being used in other amicus briefs and by other towns, but then also take specifically the things that we can identify as reasons that we wanted to enter. So,
Right, yeah, I think it's important that we make that we develop a position statement that is peculiar to Hamilton, so that we, and not necessarily towns that are twice our size and have different circumstances. So I agree, a lot of these things that are listed here are very strong, but we wanted to make it as relevant to Hamilton as possible, I think.
yeah. And the deadline is, I believe it's in September. That we've got several months before we need to have this ready. So the board has plenty of time to work on it.
The only thing I didn't see, and I don't know how this works, you know, it's come up a lot that even in the draft plans that Wyndham is working on, you know, one of their proposed sites for a couple hundred units is like, 100 yards from the property line of Hamilton. And it feels like this brief should in some way talk about that part of this, that like, there's no visibility in the fact that we are essentially sister towns, and we're not just talking about 750 units here, we're talking about 1,000 units essentially within the same half-mile radius. And I just think, as we think about additional things, that's one of the things that strikes me the most, is that if they put 200 units on the backside of Crosby's and we put 300 units on the front side, that's it doesn't work. So I think we'll have to look at how they could look at sort of multi-community assignation of property.
Yeah, but I think in reality, we have our own separate requirement, and so I think we do need to address just Hamilton in this, because we are targeted for 731 units.
I think though we're the only town that I've found that the half-mile radius from the train station actually covers 2 towns.
Yeah,
But
I
we're being
think
treated as
targeting the
though
train
it's one
station,
town.
which is 2 towns, is important.
Yeah,
'cause
so
you're
like,
talking
if you
about
put a dot
1,000,
and you draw a half-mile radius, half of that is actually in Wenham.
Yeah.
So our half-mile radius this way, you could potentially put 1,000 units within a half mile. Like, the math just doesn't work out. Everybody else, that half-mile radius is still their town.
Well, it's half mile in each direction, because our half mile goes from our border out, and then Wenham's half mile goes from their border out.
Yeah, but
I mean,
that border is 100 yards.
Right, but the reality is, I don't think we should conflate the two. Maybe we can mention it, but we need to really focus on the impact of Hamilton and how it will, because we don't share, our water plant with Wenham, we don't share our fire department, we don't share.
Share our schools. we
Right,
share
right,
our
right,
libraries,
right,
whatever.
but I mean, we want to make this a position statement that's peculiar to Hamilton. We want to say how it's going to affect us negatively.
But I
And-
think what, I know where you're going, but where I would want to say that is to reduce the number. I think the number is ludicrous for two towns that should be one in reality, based on its size and scope, but.
Right, but it's not, and we don't want to muddy the waters with defending our position. I don't disagree that we can bring that up as a point, but I think the vast majority of the argument needs to be the impacts to Hamilton. This is our position statement. We're fighting for our lives here
Right,
too.
but that all starts with 700 units plus, right? And that's
Right, right.
because they treated us separately. I think the first, shot across the bow was, there's too many units. You made your
Yes,
assumption on one train station that services two communities, and you made your separate half mile, and,
Right.
and as a result, I think we were overstated in the number one. And then you get into all the other impact on why, for a small town, rural, community, one size doesn't fit all.
Of
And these are
course
the-
it doesn't, and it's ludicrous to think it does, and
Well, I
that's
think
why.
like taking the letter from 2022 is a good start.
Yeah.
To laying out, and I think I see no harm in filing an amicus.
Amicus
Amicus
brief.
brief.
Yeah, no, it's really good.
I think it's
And
actually-
one of the other concepts would be to endorse, support Milton's reasons, first and foremost, and then use
Oh, you
the.
want to keep it all about Hamilton?
No, you want to, fresh. You want to endorse Milton as supporting their stance, and then make the bulk of the argument about Hamilton. Because the reality is, there are many communities that are adjacent towns, and those adjacent towns will have their own arguments.
Yeah, I don't
So,
know. There's
do we
mix. I
want
thought I
to
heard
take
Carolyn.
just a vote first? It's just a vote of agreement to submit an amicus brief?
Yeah, yes, I think, yeah.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion.
All right, I'll move.
Can we do public comment first?
After we,
Oh, after you do the motion, we have open.
we'll make the motion, we'll
Got it.
second, and then we'll
Got
take
it.
comment, and then we'll
Got it.
vote on it. So,
Sorry.
somebody make a motion.
Bill was about to?
Yeah, I move that we submit an amicus brief for the town of Hamilton by the September deadline
Okay, regarding the Milton
regarding.
lawsuit, yeah. The town of Milton lawsuit, yeah.
Would we
Do I have a
include that
second?
in this? Is that what?
Yes.
What it is.
So it's just supporting that, yeah.
Yes, it is. And so I'll second that.
Okay, now we will open it up for comment.
Thank you. Again, I'm here speaking personally. I'm not sure why we were punished as a town and have to have 25% increase, because that number is set for rapid transit, and we are not a rapid transit town. 750, if our two towns were together as one town, our total would be 750, and we're at like 1,100. Again, that's another issue. Caroline, what you brought up about the half-mile radius, again, half of our half-mile radius is outside of our town. I think those are all important things. Some other important things, I think it was misunderstood what some people were saying about giving up our rights to property. In Gloucester, their harbor district is run by the state. If you want to change the zoning in the harbor district, you have to go to the state first. People are concerned about giving up their rights to the land. So it doesn't matter how many units. The units is good because it's ludicrous. We have the risk management issue. Why would we risk potentially one child in every unit at $15 million when we've only gotten $28,000? It makes no sense, and I'm asking you guys to be leaders, and you don't even have to wait for a vote, because it would be irresponsible financially for our town. It could, and heaven forbid it's 4 kids per unit, that's 60 million. So that's very concerning. This is why I'm in agreement with writing the amicus brief. What else was there? they can change the guidelines at any time. So if you were gonna comply with anything, please do not comply with the guidelines. Because those guidelines, you can be in compliance one day, they've already changed them a zillion times. So that is a concern, because again, you're just giving up more and more control. And my biggest concern has nothing to do with 3A. My biggest concern is the voters of Milton voted, and if they had voted right, they would be fine and they wouldn't be getting sued. How is the Attorney General of Massachusetts suing a town for their voters' votes? And if that doesn't freak everyone in this room out, I think we need to have civics lessons or something, because it is incredibly disturbing to me. And for me, that would be the number one thing that needs to be in the amicus brief.
That's one of the issues.
Yes, I believe, yes, that's one of the issues that the SJC has
decide,
asked
right.
specifically for us to comment on. And I would be more than happy to help if there is a committee. I would be more than happy to help read over what is going to be submitted.
But that issue that you just raised, whether the Attorney General can enforce guidelines.
Correct.
That is indeed one of the issues that will be decided by the SJC.
And that is incredibly disturbing and rocks the whole foundation of our state if it's found to be okay.
Yeah, I'd like to just, agree with what was just said. And I think when you guys started talking about the units and stuff, that is secondary, totally secondary to the concept of the attack on home rule that the state is attempting. The zoning issue is paramount, and trying to keep home rule is paramount. And if it depends on what the Supreme Court goes, but if we want to submit an amicus brief, I assume in favor of Milton. I don't know if it's been explicitly said, but yes, in favor of Milton, but on the concept of state overreach against our home rule. Now, as the law is written, it's funny. The funny thing is, and I kind of was dismayed that not only Hamilton, but a lot of towns did this, is as the law was written, first came out under, I think that, it came through when Charlie Baker was governor. It was a simple contractual deal where it said it's required, and if you don't do it, you'll lose some grants. Well, every town should have been like I think there's a familiar phrase around here that if you go pound sand, well, you don't have to be rude about it, but it's like, okay, well, we're not going to send you anything. Unfortunately, our town and other towns, and maybe, I don't know, some people on the planning board, planning director, whatever, decided to play ball with the state and started attempting to horse trade units. But the whole concept was wrong, and people in public positions should have noticed that and said, look, we're going to pump the brakes, go right to our town, the people, and then see what they think first. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. Mr. Domolowitz had mentioned, he brought up the term, your job was to comply. I disagree with that in the sense that, yes, normally your job is to comply with regulations. But if either a town official or an outside entity, especially a hostile outside entity, is telling you to do something, and it's wrong, and it could harm the town on its face of it, any entity calling for us to give up any home rule or sovereignty is a hostile situation, legally, from, I think, a lot of our opinion. So, yes, I think our main thrust as you have an amicus brief is really just the whole concept of the state, how it did the law. As far as units, I think that's a distraction. Then they've got you. You're just agreeing how much they're going to do to you. But the thing is, consent is what we want to have. We want to have control as much as possible, depending on the Supreme Court. What they say, we may not. They might uphold the law. I don't know. The law looks weak, so I have a feeling they're going to either make it be amended or something like that, or have to go back to the legislature. But yeah, I think we're aware of, that's the main part of the brief, is the whole concept of the law and how it takes away home rule. And, they have to have a real, encoded in the law itself, written penalties. Otherwise, as it stands, you can just say, we're not doing anything, because the AG is just making up penalties as she goes along. Incredible. But anyway, thank you for listening to me, and that's all I have to say about that. Thanks.
Really quick, on the amicus brief, it is a cheap way for us to protect our town. It doesn't cost us very much, and I want to encourage that, because, and I would also say, if the town wants to lead, like I asked you to do as a select board, and say we're not going to comply at all, Or maybe you want to wait until later to say that, so we don't come under the scrutiny right now. But I encourage you to do that, because 15 million a year versus one lawsuit against the state that might cost us a couple $100,000. I don't want to hear we might have to go to litigation. The risk on this to the town finances is huge, and it's freaky to me, and I don't understand why we would say, oh, we might have to go to, to court, like Milton is going to court. Let's be brave and be willing to go to court and spend some money if we're going to save the town millions of dollars.
It was good to hear you say that you're willing to consider the amicus brief. I question why we wait till September. It sounded like you said, well, we have time.
Yeah,
With the
I
numbers
was going to ask.
I was just
We
saying it was
just
the
gave the
deadline.
date.
I'm just saying
Is there a
there was a
benefit to
deadline.
go early? I don't know.
With the numbers and some of the things you just heard, it seems like it's fairly a no-brainer. I mean, why wait? Let's just get it out there.
Well, I think that's what we're saying, that the deadline is September, but we're going
Okay.
to start working on it. In fact, it looks like we already have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that we wait till the last minute. I was just saying that the board had time.
We just,
They-
we don't want to miss a deadline if there is.
Yeah, and, yeah.
So did we vote yet?
We have not taken a vote, but I think to put a finer point on it, it sounds like, I think what Tosh says is good. That the framing of the current response letter that we have does focus on the particulars, and I think we would want to work with our attorneys to make sure that the support in the brief itself is specific to home rule, but also then talk about, I think the supporting points are really, and if this was to be taken away, here are the impacts that we would see. I think maybe framing it more that way helps get away from, making it, to use the phrase, horse trading around numbers of units. So maybe and I'm actually wondering if other towns who have filed these briefs are using some sort of boilerplate around the home rule. It would be nice if we were sort of coordinated in our approach to how we talk about it. And if there's case law that folks are already using, we could probably do that as well. So the motion before us is approval to move forward with an amicus brief in support of Milton's lawsuit. I feel like is there any further discussion here, or do we vote? Deb, did you have something more
I
to
just
add?
wanted to give a heads up, like a PSA thing, that there's a 501c4 that the governor and lieutenant governor created called One Commonwealth Inc. And it's a, it's an activist entity to work with consultants to get towns to agree to 3A. So just be really careful as we decide who we're going to work with. We don't want to be working with people who wrote the rules and who are going to just be like putting blinders on us and getting us to agree. I have concerns with UTIL for that reason, because I think they're pretty in bed with the 3A stuff, and I think that there's some nuance about 3A in it.
UTIL is contracted to us. They represent us
Yeah,
and our interests.
so that's great. I'm just saying that it-
That's where the relationship will work.
Right, I
They're
think-
a private contractor. They've been hired in other towns to do certain things. They've done what they were hired to do in those towns. I expect that they will do what we've hired them to do. So.
Right, and I guess the clarity of what we've hired them to do, I thought it was just to focus on development of the downtown, but I understand the RFP was really how can you execute 3A? How can 3A be executed? And so I think that's just the subtle language. So I'm just trying to raise awareness, because there are consultants out there, they're on YouTube, they're all being funded by a 501c4 that we can't see who's funding it. And just to be careful that if the citizens, and you guys as our leaders, and we're so grateful for you sitting there, truly. Thank you for allowing us to talk. I really do appreciate it. We just want to make sure we don't get deceived, or we don't align ourselves with entities that are actually being paid by the governor ultimately to get her law passed. Just a FYI, thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Deb. And I think, I got a question recently. Somebody said, well, I'm really surprised that you guys would entertain an amicus brief when you're also doing this other thing. And I think we're trying to be as balanced as we can possibly be, right? Like, we're acknowledging the problems, we're acknowledging what Milton has gone through, we're gonna go through this. We're also working with the consultant, because we really do need a plan for downtown, But if in fact the Supreme Court comes back and instead of siding with Milton, they say that this moves forward, but it has higher regulation, we want to still be in the process of being proactive about how we think through this. But again, as we've said, the town can decide in April on no uncertain terms that even if the consultant comes up with a plan that felt right for some people, I trust that there is enough vocal opposition to this that folks will know that, you know, you don't have to vote for it. You can say no, and then, you know, we'll go to the town and say no. But I hope that folks see that we're trying to be as balanced and open as we can through this process to sort of, I mean, candidly hedge to see where it ends up in October with Milton, where we get to in October with our consultants, where the town is, you know, come spring. But, you know, it could be that this gets struck down in the fall, in which case UTL can focus their efforts purely on form-based code for development of downtown, and then, you know, frees up more of their brain for that. But we don't know. So many unknowns. I don't know about y'all, but this tiny hotel room in Raleigh, North Carolina.
You need to vote?
Very
We need
hot.
to vote.
You need to vote?
We need to vote.
Yeah, so can we take a vote? I'll do roll call starting with Tom.
Tom Myers, I'm just going to abstain. I generally support the filing the brief, but given my day job with the Commonwealth, there could be a potential conflict, so I want to file the necessary disclosures before I rule on any sort of issue around this, as I just reading the conflict of interest law real quick. I just want to make sure I file all the necessary disclosure, but I'm going to abstain for this until I can get that in.
That's a good point.
Fair.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Bill Wilson, yes.
Caroline Beaulieu, yes. All right, Joe, you will work with KP. Is that the
Yep.
plan?
Work with KP and show everything to you, so, yes.
Cool. If there is no further thing, oh, I had one more thing, sorry, I want to go too. There was some conversation about canceling the July 1st meeting. We do not currently have an agenda for that meeting, and there is a high risk that we will not have quorum because of the vacation week. So I just wanted to proactively check in to see how folks felt about canceling that July 1st meeting and picking up, I think it's July 14th is the next meeting after that.
July 15th.
15th, sorry.
I would be okay with that.
Okay.
Let's,
I'm okay with either one, but
yeah. Let's hear that.
Yeah, either one's fine.
Do we need to take a vote on that?
No, technically you can, as the chair, you can cancel the meeting without a vote, so. That's
I'm just drunk
up to
with
you.
power.
Up to you.
Yeah, okay. So we will likely cancel that meeting to be totally confirmed, because I also don't want to lose momentum on some of the things that we would have reviewed. So as long as we stick to our timelines on some of those other things, I think it's fine to cancel. All right, everyone's favorite motion.
Motion to adjourn.
second.
All right, roll call. Tom.
Tom Myers, yes.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Bill Wilson, yes.
Caroline Beaulieu, yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you
great night.
all for coming. What a great interactive group. It really means